You go fly, baby, Grandmother Evelyn Jackson said, pressing a wad of carefully counted bills into Maya's palm. And you fly up front. Show them how it's done. Our people have spent too many generations at the back of the bus to be settling for less now that we can afford more. Maya Jackson clutched the boarding pass in her hands like it was made of spun glass. Her eyes traced over the words again and again, hardly believing what she saw printed there. Jackson, Maya, Seat 2B, First Class. The 17-year-old debate champion from Westwood High School in Atlanta had never seen the words First Class printed next to her name before. For most of her life, just the idea of flying at all had seemed like a distant dream. But now, standing in the bustling Terminal A of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, that dream had transformed into something even grander. As she waited in the terminal, Maya pulled out her debate notes, reviewing the key arguments for her topic on structural barriers in modern contracts. The pages were worn at the corners from countless hours of study, annotated in 4 different colors of ink representing different categories of evidence. She had spent months researching how seemingly neutral agreements could create hidden obstacles for certain groups through selective enforcement and unwritten exceptions. The dense language of the airline's Contract of Carriage lay open beside her notes. She had highlighted several sections about involuntary seat reassignments and passenger rights, the yellow marker bleeding slightly through the thin paper. Section 21(3), she muttered to herself, running her finger along the text. Passengers with confirmed seat assignments may only be reassigned in case of operational, safety, or security reasons with appropriate compensation for any downgrade. She had studied these rules carefully, wanting to understand her rights for her first flying experience. Her phone buzzed with a text from her debate coach, Dr. Rivera. Remember, contracts are power relationships disguised as neutral agreements. Safe travels and show them what Westwood debaters are made of. The air in the terminal hummed with the familiar sounds of travel, the muffled announcements echoing from overhead speakers, occasionally cutting through the background noise with urgency before fading back into unintelligible murmurs. The rhythmic clacking of rolling suitcases against tile floors created an unpredictable percussion. The constant low murmur of 1,000 private conversations happening simultaneously formed a sonic blanket that wrapped around the entire space. To Maya, it was the soundtrack of possibility. She adjusted the strap of her single carry-on bag, all she'd need for the 3-day trip, and straightened the collar of her navy blue blazer, a lucky thrift store find she'd had tailored with the money she'd saved from her first tutoring checks. The blazer was her armor, her professional skin, the thing that made her feel like she belonged in rooms where people like her weren't always welcome. It was well-made but visibly different from the effortlessly expensive clothing worn by many of the business travelers surrounding her no-designer label. No perfect fall to the shoulders that came from custom tailoring. Westwood High School's debate team had a storied reputation, but Maya was its undisputed star. Her analytical mind, combined with an uncanny ability to connect abstract concepts to real-world implications, had earned her regional and state championships. But the national title had eluded her last year when she placed second. This year would be different. This year, she would be rested and prepared, not exhausted from a 2-day bus ride like her competitors from wealthier schools. Maya's topic this year had personal significance. Her research on structural barriers in modern contracts had opened her eyes to the subtle ways that seemingly neutral agreements could disadvantage certain groups. How fine print could become an instrument of exclusion. How equal access on paper didn't always translate to equal access in practice. How the same rules could be rigidly enforced for some while flexibly interpreted for others. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification from the National Youth Debate Association confirming her registration for tomorrow's competition. The subject line read, "Welcome to New York City, debaters." Maya allowed herself a small smile. New York City. She was really going. The digital boarding pass displayed on her phone still seemed surreal. First class, one way to LaGuardia. She'd memorized every detail of what to expect priority boarding. Wider seats with actual legroom, complimentary beverages, hot towels, a meal served on real dishes, small luxuries that seemed extraordinary to someone who had grown up carefully counting every dollar. Her return ticket was economy class. She wasn't that extravagant. But this first experience, this moment of arriving at the biggest competition of her life, well-rested and confident, that was worth the extra expense. Final boarding call for flight 1108 to LaGuardia, came the announcement, the voice unnaturally cheerful through the airport speakers. Maya took a deep breath and headed toward gate A22, her debate notes clutched against her chest like a shield. Community support. The past 6 months had been a blur of activity, all aimed at this moment, when her debate team at Westwood High had qualified for the National Youth Forensics Championship in New York City. It should have been a moment of pure celebration. The team had erupted in cheers, hugging each other in the school library as Dr. Rivera announced their acceptance. But reality had quickly set in. The school could only afford to send the team on a 48-hour bus journey, which would leave them exhausted before they even began competing. Maya couldn't let that happen. Not after she'd spent months crafting her argument on barriers in modern contracts. Not after she'd practiced in front of her bathroom mirror until her throat was raw and her arguments flowed like water. Her little brother banging on the door complaining about needing to shower. Not after she'd stayed up past midnight balancing debate research with AP coursework, college applications, and family responsibilities. So she had made a plan. She'd taken a job at the Daily Grind coffee shop near school, arriving at 5:30 a.m. to help open before heading to class, the smell of coffee beans clinging to her clothes all day. She'd started tutoring freshmen in algebra and geometry at $15 per hour, patiently explaining concepts on Saturday mornings when her peers were sleeping in or hanging out at the mall. She'd organize weekend community car washes, standing in the hot Atlanta sun until her skin darkened 3 shades deeper, the water making her sneakers squelch with every step for hours afterward. And slowly, dollar by dollar, she'd saved. Each contribution to her plane fund was recorded meticulously in a small notebook, watching the total climb from double digits into hundreds. But it wasn't just her effort. When word spread about what Maya was trying to do, her community had rallied in ways that still brought tears to her eyes when she thought about it. The regulars at the coffee shop started leaving extra tips earmarked for her plane fund, an extra $1 here, $5 there, occasionally a 20 discreetly tucked under a saucer with a whispered, "For New York, sweetheart." Her church congregation had taken up a special collection after Sunday service, Pastor Williams calling her to the front as congregants dropped bills into a wicker basket, some contributing dollars that Maya knew they could scarcely spare themselves. Her parents, already working double shifts to keep the family afloat, had somehow found extra dollars to contribute. Her father, a city bus driver who left home at 4:30 every morning, had picked up extra weekend routes. Her mother, a hospital administrator who understood the value of being well-rested, had taken on additional billing work she could do from home late at night. That girl's going places. She'd overheard Mr. Lewis, the coffee shop owner, tell a customer one day as she wiped down tables in the corner, "Might as well get there in style, first class all the way." Her father, a practical man who counted every penny twice, had been skeptical at first. "First class?" he'd asked over dinner, his fork pausing midway to his mouth. "That's excessive. Maya, economy gets you there just the same. That money could go toward college application fees." But her mother, who knew something about the subtle ways status operated in professional spaces, had supported her decision. "Let her arrive ready to win. Calvin," she'd said, resting her hand on his arm, "you know what it's like to be exhausted before you even start. She's earned this." The debate about her travel plans had sparked dinner table discussions about value, practicality, and occasional indulgence, about the difference between extravagance and strategic investment, about knowing when to save and when to spend. In the end, it was Grandma Evelyn who had settled the matter. She had arrived one Sunday after church with an envelope containing $200 in cash, money she'd been setting aside from her Social Security checks for months, skipping her weekly hair appointment and cutting back on her beloved romance novels. "This is for your first-class ticket," she'd announced, placing the envelope directly in Maya's hands with a firmness that brooked no argument. "When I was your age, they wouldn't even let me in the front of the bus, much less first class on an airplane. You go up there and show them what excellence looks like. You sit in that good seat with your head high like you belong there because you do." Maya had protested, knowing how limited her grandmother's income was. But Evelyn Jackson was not a woman accustomed to having her decisions questioned. "I'm not asking, child. I'm telling, you take this money and you use it exactly as I said. I want to close my eyes at night, knowing my grandbaby is sitting up front, getting treated like the queen she is. So she'd combined her grandmother's contribution with her own savings and purchased a one-way first-class ticket to New York City. The economy return ticket would get her home just fine after the competition, but her arrival, that would be something special. The support hadn't ended with financial contributions. Her debate teammates had helped gather research materials, staying late at the school library to access database searches they couldn't afford at home. The school librarian, Ms. Patel, had stayed after hours to help her access academic journals normally unavailable to high school students. Even the school principal, Dr. Hernandez, had written a letter to the debate judges, extolling Maya's exceptional analytical skills and dedication to rigorous research. Every dollar in her pocket, every fact in her research binder, every confidence-boosting text message saved on her phone. Each was a testament to the community that believed in her. Each represented someone who had invested in her future, someone who saw in her the potential to break barriers and create change. As Maya approached Gate A22, she felt the weight of those expectations, not as a burden, but as wings. Airport arrival and first-class experience. The gate area buzzed with pre-boarding energy that Maya could feel vibrating in her chest. Business travelers tapped urgently on laptops, their faces illuminated by blue screen light as they raced to finish one more email before disconnecting. Families corralled restless children, distributing snacks and electronic distractions with practiced efficiency. Solo travelers retreated into headphones and novels, creating invisible bubbles of privacy in the crowded public space. Maya observed it all with the keen attention of someone experiencing a new world, cataloging details for future reference. She studied the other first-class passengers waiting to board, noticing the subtle markers of their status. Mostly men in expensive suits with luxury watches that caught the light when they gestured. A few women with designer handbags that Maya recognized from magazines Prada, Louis Vuitton, Hermes casually placed on empty seats as if they weren't worth thousands of dollars. An older gentleman in golf attire scrolled through stock portfolios on his tablet, occasionally murmuring into his phone about quarterly projections and market volatility. A middle-aged woman in a St. John knit suit that probably cost more than Maya's entire debate wardrobe spoke quietly but authoritatively into her phone, using the clipped tones of someone accustomed to giving orders. None of them looked like Maya. None of them looked like they had ever had to count dollars carefully or choose between necessities. None of them looked like they were experiencing first class for the first time. Maya straightened her posture, lifting her chin slightly as her grandmother had taught her. Your dignity isn't determined by your dollars. Grandma Evelyn always said she belonged here just as much as they did. She'd paid for her seat, fair and square. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Tasha. Girl, you really doing this? Send pics from first class living vicariously through you right now. Maya smiled, typing back quickly. About to board. We'll send selfie from fancy seat. Might steal the little hot towel too. The terminal windows framed a perfect view of their aircraft, a massive metal bird that would soon carry her hundreds of miles away. Ground crew scurried around it like worker ants, loading luggage and performing last-minute checks. Maya watched one worker give a thumbs up to another, a small human interaction that somehow made the immensity of air travel seem more manageable. The boarding area's atmosphere shifted as a gate agent approached the microphone. Conversations quieted. Travelers gathered their belongings, preparing for the announcement everyone was waiting for. The overhead fluorescent lights gleamed off the polished floor, casting everyone in slightly unflattering illumination. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speakers, instantly commanding attention. We will now begin boarding Sky East Flight 1108 to LaGuardia. We'll start with our Diamond Elite members, first-class passengers, and those needing special assistance. Maya's heart leapt. That was her. She was a first-class passenger. She gathered her carry-on and debate materials, joining the short line of premium travelers at the gate. A businessman in what she recognized as a tailored Italian suit, the diagonal weave of the fabric, just slightly different from department store suits, gave her a curious glance, his eyes flicking from her face to her thrift store blazer and back again. But he said nothing. An older woman with a tennis bracelet that sparkled with what had to be real diamonds looked her up and down before returning attention to her phone, her mouth tightening almost imperceptibly. Maya ignored them both, focusing instead on the feeling of her boarding pass between her fingers. the tangible proof of what hard work and community support could achieve. She recalled her grandmother's stories about segregated transportation, about colored-only sections and seats at the back of the bus, about being made to feel like an unwelcome intrusion in public spaces. They tried to convince us we didn't belong, Grandma Evelyn had told her, her voice strong despite the pain of the memory. But belonging isn't something other people get to decide for you. Remember that when they look at you like you're in the wrong place, you look right back and think, I paid for this seat same as you, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. Maya smoothed her blazer one more time, conscious of the impression she wanted to make. Not for the other passengers, for herself. For the version of Maya Jackson who would step off the plane in New York City ready to compete against the best young debaters in the country. The first-class line moved quickly, efficient, like everything associated with premium travel. Maya noticed the difference in how gate agents spoke to these passengers. More eye contact, warmer smiles. Good to see you again, Mr. Phillips. Enjoy your flight, Miss Winters. Small courtesies extended without request. These subtle differences weren't listed as benefits on the airline's website, but they were very real, the invisible architecture of privilege that supported certain travelers while remaining invisible to others. Maya wondered briefly if those courtesies would extend to her as well. Would they see the first-class boarding pass? Or would they see only a black teenager who didn't fit their mental image of a premium passenger? The thought brought a flutter of anxiety that tightened her chest, but she pushed it aside. She had every right to be there. She had the documentation to prove it. That would be enough. It had to be. As she approached the front of the line, Maya rehearsed the small script she'd prepared. Good afternoon. 2B, window seat. Simple. Professional. The kind of thing a seasoned first-class passenger would say. Not too much information. Not too little, just the right amount of confidence to signal that she belonged. But as her turn approached, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The gate agent's eyes had already found her, scanning her with an expression Maya recognized all too well from department store security guards and restaurant hosts. It was the look of someone making quick, unflattering assumptions. The look of someone preparing to create a problem where none existed. The subtle shift in the gate agent's expression lasted only a second, but Maya felt it like a physical touch. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. They'll try to make you feel small. Don't you let them. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward, boarding pass and ID ready. Her debate training ticking in. Control the emotion, focus on facts, maintain composure. This, too, was a kind of debate, one where the stakes were her dignity and her rightful place in a space she had legitimately accessed. Part 2, the confrontation begins. Initial boarding conflict. The gate agent, a woman in her mid-50s with stiff blonde hair lacquered into place and a permanently pinched expression, looked up from her computer. Her name tag read Patricia Whitfield in crisp black letters, the gold border indicating at least 20 years of service. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as they scanned Maya from head to toe in a fraction of a second, making a dozen assumptions with clinical efficiency. Behind the counter, Patricia's workstation had several personal touches that contrasted sharply with her frosty demeanor. A photo of 2 college-age kids smiling from a vacation somewhere tropical, their sunburned faces full of untroubled happiness. A small potted succulent in a ceramic container painted with "World's Best Mom." A calendar with what looked like tuition payment dates circled in red, several with exclamation points beside them. The contrast between her personal life and her professional demeanor was striking, as if she left the warmth of those photos at home when she came to work. "You," Patricia called sharply, beckoning with a single finger, the crimson nail polish catching the fluorescent light. "Young lady in the blue blazer, come here. Not miss or ma'am like the passengers before her, or just you." Maya's stomach tightened into a knot. Had she done something wrong? Was her carry-on too large? She approached the podium, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs with such force she was certain Patricia could see it through her blazer. "Yes, ma'am," she said politely, her voice steady despite the anxiety building in her chest. "Let me see your boarding pass," Patricia said, voice flat and cold as January ice. Hand extended with palm up, fingers curling impatiently. "Of course." Maya handed it over, watching as the woman's eyes narrowed at the paper, brows furrowing as if she were examining a suspicious document. Patricia stared at the boarding pass for an uncomfortably long time, then turned to her computer, typing rapidly. The harsh clicking of her acrylic nails against the keyboard filled the awkward silence, each tap feeling like a tiny accusation. As she typed, her eyes darted nervously toward her supervisor across the gate area, a balding man who was dealing with another passenger, before returning to her screen. "There's a problem with this ticket," Patricia finally said, not meeting Maya's eyes directly, focusing instead on a point just past her left shoulder. "A problem." Maya's voice came out smaller than she intended, and she immediately straightened her spine, recalibrating. "I checked in online this morning, and everything was fine. What seems to be the issue? The system says this seat is inoperable," Patricia replied, her eyes flicking to the side in a way that made Maya instantly suspicious. It was the same tone debate opponents often had when fabricating evidence on the spot, that momentary glance away from direct eye contact. "That's strange. I didn't receive any notification about that," Maya said, standing straighter, channeling her debate posture. "Could you please check again? Maybe it's a system error, Patricia's mouth tightened, the lipstick cracking slightly at the corners. She typed something else, her nails clicking with increased intensity, the sound aggressive in the small space between them. "No, it's definitely showing as unavailable. We'll need to reassign you to another seat." Maya noticed that Patricia was not turning her screen to show her the alleged issue, another red flag. "May I see the system message about the seat being inoperable?" she asked, keeping her tone respectful but firm. The question clearly caught Patricia off guard. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. "That's not possible. It's an internal system. Passengers don't have access to that information." "I understand, but if there's an issue with my assigned seat, I should be entitled to see verification of the problem," Maya said, drawing on her debate training to keep her voice steady and logical despite the anxiety building in her chest. "That's part of the consumer protection regulations for air travel." It was a slight bluff. Maya wasn't certain if such regulations existed specifically for seat verification, but she knew from her research that transparency in service changes was a general principle in transportation contracts. Patricia's expression hardened, mouth pinching into a tight line. "Young lady, I've been doing this job for 27 years. I don't need to prove anything to you. Now, I can offer you a middle seat in economy, or you can take the next flight." Just then, another passenger approached, a middle-aged and white man in a golf shirt and khakis, his skin tanned from leisure rather than labor. "Excuse me, I just realized I forgot to request an aisle seat. Any chance you could help me?" The transformation in Patricia was immediate and remarkable, like watching ice thaw in spring sunlight. Her tight expression softened, her voice warmed considerably, taking on an almost musical quality. "Of course, Mr. Daniels. So good to see you again. Let me check that for you right away," she typed briefly, her movements suddenly graceful rather than aggressive. "You're in luck. I can move you to 3C. It's an aisle seat in first class, just as you prefer." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. First class had available seats. Then why was Patricia claiming her seat was inoperable? "Excuse me, man," Maya said when Patricia had finished with the man, her voice stronger now, fueled by the obvious contradiction she'd just witnessed. "I couldn't help but notice you just assigned a first-class seat. If there are available seats, I'd like to keep my original assignment in first class or be given an equivalent one, not downgraded to economy." Patricia's warm demeanor vanished instantly, her expression freezing over like a pond in December. "That was a completely different situation," she said coldly. "Mr. Daniels is a Diamond Elite member with over 2 million miles. I understand he's a valued customer," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice even despite the growing knot of anger in her stomach. "But I purchased a first-class ticket. If my specific seat is unavailable for some reason, I should be reassigned to another first-class seat, not downgraded to economy, without compensation or evidence of necessity." "There are no available first-class seats," Patricia insisted, despite having just assigned one to another passenger right in front of Maya. "This isn't a debate, young lady." The word debate hit Maya like a cue light in a performance. This was, in fact, exactly like a debate. There were facts. There were arguments based on those facts. There was a resolution to be reached based on the strength of those arguments. and she had just caught her opponent in a significant contradiction. Actually, ma'am, Section 21. 3 of your airline's Contract of Carriage states that passengers with confirmed seat assignments may only be reassigned in cases of operational safety or security reasons, with appropriate compensation for any downgrade. Maya said, her voice gaining strength as she moved from personal discomfort to the familiar territory of evidence-based argument. Since I have a confirmed first-class seat assignment, I would need to be informed of the specific operational, safety, or security reason necessitating my reassignment, and provided with appropriate compensation if downgraded. Patricia blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting to be quoted airline policy by a teenager. Her hands froze over the keyboard. I already told you the reason. The seat is inoperable. Then I should be assigned another first-class seat, not downgraded, Maya countered, and I should be shown verification of the issue with my original seat. The line behind Maya was growing. Several passengers were watching the exchange with interest, some with visible impatience, others with growing curiosity about the unusual confrontation. Patricia seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the public nature of the interaction she had initiated. I need to help other passengers, Patricia said dismissively, printing a new boarding pass and thrusting it toward Maya. Take this boarding pass for 23EE or miss the flight entirely. Your choice. The new pass showed a middle seat in economy class, sandwiched between 2 already assigned positions. Maya didn't take it. I'd like to speak to your supervisor. Please. Patricia's face flushed with anger, 2 bright spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. My supervisor will tell you the same thing. Nevertheless, I'd like to speak with them, Maya insisted, maintaining eye contact despite the discomfort of confrontation. Everything in her wanted to back down, to accept the downgrade rather than cause a scene. But her grandmother's words rang in her ears. Don't you let them make you small. People in line were beginning to murmur. A young woman with glasses had taken out her phone and appeared to be recording. An elderly man behind Maya cleared his throat loudly. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice carrying the distinctive authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Maya turned slightly to see a distinguished older gentleman with silver hair and the ramrod-straight posture of military training. Patricia forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. No problem, sir. Just a seating issue we're resolving. It doesn't sound resolved to me, the man said, his tone pleasant but firm. It sounds like this young lady purchased a first-class ticket and is being arbitrarily downgraded despite having a valid boarding pass. Maya glanced back gratefully. The man gave her a small nod of encouragement, his eyes communicating clear support. Patricia's eyes darted around, noting the growing audience with visible discomfort. Her supervisor was still occupied with another matter at the far end of the gate area. She was on her own, and the situation was escalating beyond her control in a very public setting. Fine, she said through clenched teeth. Let me call the gate manager. As Patricia picked up her phone, Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. This was not how she had imagined her first flying experience would begin. But she was prepared. She knew her rights. She had facts on her side, and now, it seemed, she had witnesses as well. The elderly man behind her leaned forward slightly. Stand your ground, young lady, he whispered. You paid for that seat fair and square. Maya nodded her thanks, drawing strength from the unexpected alliance. Whatever happened next, she was not facing it alone. Escalating discrimination. While they waited for the gate manager, Maya observed Patricia continuing to process other first-class passengers, all of whom happened to be white, without incident. Each received a warm smile, a have a wonderful flight, and smooth passage to the jet bridge without a second glance at their documentation or questions about their seating assignments. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Like watching a film switch between color and black and white with each new passenger. When an older white couple approached together, Patricia's entire demeanor transformed, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, so good to see you again, she exclaimed, voice lilting with pleasure. Your usual seats are all ready, 1A and 1B, just as you prefer. We've stocked the Chardonnay you enjoy. Maya watched carefully, mentally logging each interaction. So seats in first class were not only available, but being held for specific passengers. The inoperable seat claim was looking increasingly fraudulent with each passing moment. The gate manager arrived, a harried-looking man with thinning hair and a practiced customer service smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. His name badge read Robert Taylor, gate manager. He carried a tablet and had the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who had been called away from other pressing duties. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, looking between Patricia and Maya, his tone professional but with an undercurrent of impatience. Before Patricia could speak, Maya stepped forward slightly, determined to frame the situation accurately. "I purchased a first-class ticket for seat 2B, she explained, her debate training helping her deliver the facts concisely. "Agent Whitfield is trying to reassign me to economy, claiming my seat is inoperable. However, I've observed her assigning other passengers to first class during our conversation, which contradicts her claim that no first-class seats are available." Patricia interjected quickly, her words tumbling out with defensive energy. "The passenger doesn't understand our seating protocols. The specific seat she purchased had to be taken out of service for maintenance issues, and we have no equivalent replacements in the cabin. I was simply trying to find her the best available alternative." Robert looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Maya and Patricia. "Let me check the system." He leaned over Patricia's terminal and typed a few commands, his brow furrowing as he read the information on the screen. His eyebrows rose slightly, and he scrolled down, reading something that clearly surprised him. "Patricia, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, gesturing a few steps away from the counter. They moved just far enough that Maya couldn't hear their whispered conversation, but their body language told a story that needed no audio. Robert seemed to be asking pointed questions, his head tilted in confusion. Patricia's responses involved increasingly animated hand gestures, her shoulders rising defensively. Robert shook his head several times, running a hand through his thinning hair in apparent frustration. Meanwhile, the young woman with glasses who had been recording approached Maya, stepping closer with purposeful confidence. "Hi, I'm Dr. Daniela Rodriguez," she said quietly, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone who chose her words with care. "I'm a civil rights attorney specializing in transportation equity. I've been documenting the disparate treatment at this gate for the past 20 minutes. Would you like me to stay with you through this process?" Maya felt a wave of relief wash through her, warm and unexpected. "Yes, please, I'm Maya Jackson." "You're doing everything right, Maya," Rodriguez assured her, dark eyes serious behind stylish rectangular frames. "Keep calm, know your rights, and document everything. I've already captured significant inconsistencies in how different passengers are being processed." Dr. Rodriguez's presence brought a sense of validation that strengthened Maya's resolve. She wasn't imagining things. The differential treatment was real and obvious enough that a professional attorney had independently noticed and begun documenting it. Robert and Patricia returned to the counter. Robert now wore an expression of professional concern mixed with evident discomfort. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Ms. Jackson, I apologize for the confusion. It appears there was a system error that Agent Whitfield misinterpreted. Your seat 2B is fully operational and available to you as purchased." Maya nodded, relief and vindication flooding through her. "Thank you for clarifying." Patricia stood rigidly beside him, her lips pressed into a thin line like a sealed envelope. Robert turned to her expectantly. After an uncomfortable pause that stretched several seconds too long, she spoke in a tone devoid of any genuine remorse. "We apologize for the inconvenience." The "we" was telling an attempt to dilute her personal responsibility by hiding behind corporate identity. Maya could tell the apology was forced, but she simply nodded again. "Thank you. May I board now?" Robert handed her the original boarding pass, nodding with professional courtesy. "Yes, of course. Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Jackson." As Maya moved toward the jet bridge entrance, she heard Patricia mutter under her breath, just loud enough to be audible, "These premium seats are for our regular customers, not charity cases." The comment wasn't meant to be heard, but Maya caught it clearly. So did Dr. Rodriguez, who raised her eyebrows and made a note on her phone, fingers tapping rapidly across the screen. "That comment has been documented as well," Dr. Rodriguez said quietly to Maya. "Disparate treatment is one issue. Explicitly discriminatory remarks are another level entirely." The jet bridge stretched before Maya like a tunnel to another world. With each step, She felt a mix of emotions cascading through her relief at having successfully defended her rights, pride in her composure under pressure, and lingering unease about what might await her on board. Behind her, she could hear Robert speaking quietly but firmly to Patricia, the words inappropriate. Protocol violation and serious consequences drifted forward, carried on the recycled air of the enclosed walkway. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant greeted Maya with the standard welcome. "Good afternoon and welcome aboard. First class is to your left." Maya took a deep breath and stepped onto the plane. The cabin's atmosphere felt different from anything she had experienced before, quieter, more spacious, somehow more rarefied. The seats were wide leather chairs rather than the cramped economy accommodations she had imagined. The overhead bins stood open, awaiting the carefully curated carry-ons of premium passengers. As she made her way to seat 2B, Maya noticed several passengers already settled in the first-class cabin, a businessman typing on a sleek laptop that probably cost more than her entire debate team's travel budget, a woman flipping through a fashion magazine, her fingers adorned with rings that caught the cabin lighting, an older gentleman already dozing with an eye mask in place, his cashmere sweater probably worth more than Maya's blazer. Maya found her seat, a window position with more legroom than she had anticipated. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into the soft leather seat. It embraced her like an affirmation she belonged here. Despite Patricia's efforts to convince her otherwise, this space was rightfully hers. She pulled out her phone to text Tasha and her grandmother, letting them know she had successfully boarded. As she typed, Maya noticed a well-dressed white couple boarding the plane, their expressions shifting from pleasant anticipation to visible surprise as they scanned the first-class cabin. The woman, elegantly attired in a designer suit that screamed old money, nudged her husband and whispered something, her eyes fixed on Maya with undisguised displeasure. Maya had the distinct feeling that her first confrontation of the day might not be her last. The jet bridge battle had been won, but the war for her rightful place was just beginning. The privileged passengers enter. The couple made their way down the first-class aisle with the practiced ease of frequent flyers, checking seat numbers with casual glances. The woman was in her early 50s with expertly highlighted blonde hair and the kind of smooth, taut skin that spoke of regular maintenance rather than just good genes. She wore a St. John knit suit in cream that probably cost more than 3 months of Maya's father's salary, accented with a simple pearl necklace that was anything but simple in its quality. Her posture and movements carried the practiced grace of someone who had been taught deportment since childhood. Her husband, slightly older with distinguished silver at his temples and a tailored charcoal suit that draped perfectly across broad shoulders, carried himself with the easy confidence of habitual authority. His watch, which Maya recognized as a Patek Philippe from her debate research on luxury goods, probably cost more than her entire educational fund. As they approached row 2, the woman's professionally whitened smile faltered. She checked her boarding pass, then looked at the seat numbers again, her eyes darting between the row markers and Maya with growing confusion that quickly morphed into something harder. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cultured but cool as a cucumber slice. "I believe you may be in our seats." Maya looked up, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "I'm in 2B. Are you 2A and 2C? The woman's smile tightened, crow's feet appearing at the corners of her eyes despite what had clearly been excellent Botox. "No, we're 2B and 2C. There must be some confusion." Maya removed her boarding pass from her pocket and showed it to the woman without relinquishing it. "My boarding pass says 2B. The husband leaned forward, examining Maya's documentation with narrowed eyes that reminded her of a banker reviewing a loan application he had already decided to reject. "Victoria, let me handle this." He turned his attention to Maya, his tone shifting to the carefully measured patience one might use with a child. "Young lady, there's clearly been a mistake in the system. We're Platinum Elite members, and we specifically reserved these seats weeks ago. We always sit in row 2. Maya remained calm, drawing on her debate techniques for maintaining composure under pressure. "I understand, sir, but I also reserved this seat, and my boarding pass confirms it. Perhaps the gate agent can help sort out the confusion." The husband, whose expensive aftershave carried notes of sandalwood and entitlement, frowned, the lines in his forehead deepening. "That won't be necessary. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable in another section anyway." This is your first time in first class, isn't it? The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, thick as maple syrup but far less sweet. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the physical manifestation of being underestimated. Dismissed. Put in her place, the subtle implication that she was an interloper, a tourist in a space where they were permanent residents. Whether it's my first time or my 100th doesn't affect the validity of my ticket, she replied evenly, maintaining eye contact despite the discomfort. My boarding pass assigns me to seat 2B, and that's where I'm sitting. The wife, Victoria, sighed theatrically, as if Maya's insistence on occupying her purchased seat was an incomprehensible breach of natural order. Thomas, this is ridiculous. Call the flight attendant. Thomas Harrington raised his hand, summoning a passing flight attendant with the practiced gesture of someone used to having staff materialize at his command. His manicured fingers barely needed to rise above shoulder height before a response was triggered. The flight attendant, a young man with a name tag reading Brandon Miller, approached with a professional smile. His blonde hair was neatly combed, his uniform pressed to perfection, his manner suggesting someone relatively new to the job, but eager to perform well. How can I help you folks today? Brandon asked, his voice pleasantly modulated. We seem to have a seating confusion, Thomas explained, his tone suggesting this was a minor inconvenience that should be swiftly resolved in his favor. We're supposed to be in 2B and 2C, but he gestured toward Maya with a flick of his wrist, as if indicating a misplaced piece of furniture. Brandon looked at Maya, his expression professionally neutral. May I see your boarding pass? Miss, Maya handed it over. Brandon examined it carefully, then checked Thomas and Victoria's documentation as well. His eyebrows rose slightly as he processed the information. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, your boarding passes show you in 3B and 3C, not row 2, he said, his tone remaining courteous but matter-of-fact. Victoria's face flushed with color that her expensive foundation couldn't quite hide. That's impossible. We always sit in row 2. We're Platinum Elite members. There's been a mistake. I understand, Mrs. Harrington, but the system has you assigned to row 3 today. Both are excellent seats with the same service, Brandon assured her, attempting to de-escalate the situation with a smile that was quickly losing its wattage under Victoria's icy glare. Thomas's jaw tightened visibly, a muscle working in his cheek. There's been a mistake. Patricia at the gate always makes sure we get our preferred seats. Check with her. Brandon's professional demeanor remained intact, but Maya noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a slight tension in his shoulders suggesting he was no stranger to these types of encounters with entitled passengers. I'm happy to verify with the gate, but all seat assignments are finalized at boarding. Ms. Jackson's boarding pass clearly assigns her to 2B, and your passes show 3 and 3C. From a few rows ahead, a woman turned around. Observing the interaction with obvious interest, Maya recognized her as Dr. Rodriguez from the gate area. The attorney's presence somehow bolstered Maya's confidence. Someone was watching. Someone who understood the dynamics at play. Thomas lowered his voice, leaning closer to Brandon. Look, we spend over $50,000 a year with this airline. Surely there's something you can do to accommodate loyal customers. His tone implied that this something should obviously involve removing Maya from what he clearly considered his rightful seat. Brandon's smile remained fixed, but his eyes had cooled considerably. I apologize, Mr. Harrington, but seat assignments are binding once boarding passes are issued. Ms. Jackson is correctly seated in her assigned seat. Victoria made no attempt to lower her voice, clearly intending her next words to be heard by those around them. This is outrageous. We've never had this problem before. Her eyes flicked dismissively over Maya. And I find it hard to believe that all the first-class seats were legitimately booked today. The implication was clear as crystal. Maya didn't belong there. Couldn't have afforded the ticket through legitimate means. Must have been mistakenly upgraded or, worse, obtained the seat through questionable methods. Maya felt her face grow warm, blood rushing to her cheeks in a physiological response she couldn't control. But she remembered her debate training. Control the emotion. Focus on facts. Maintain composure. My seat was purchased legally and assigned properly, she said calmly, meeting Victoria's gaze without flinching. I have every right to be here. Thomas looked at her with the kind of patronizing smile adults often reserve for children they consider precocious but misguided. No one's questioning your right to be here again, young lady. We're simply pointing out that mistakes happen, and flexible people help correct them. The message was clear: be flexible by giving up what was rightfully hers. The subtext hung in the air between them that her comfort, her experience, her rights were inherently less valuable than theirs, that her purchase somehow counted for less because of who she was. Brandon, seeming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, attempted to diffuse the tension. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, row 3 offers the exact same amenities and service as row 2. I'll be happy to help you stow your bags there and get you settled. Victoria's expression suggested she'd been offered accommodations in the cargo hold rather than one row back in the same premium cabin. This is absolutely unacceptable, she hissed, pearls quivering with indignation. I want to speak to the lead flight attendant immediately. As Brandon left to find his supervisor, Maya noticed more passengers watching the interaction. Some seemed merely curious about the delay in boarding. Others appeared to be assessing the situation more critically. An older white man in 1D was frowning thoughtfully. A young Hispanic woman in 4A was typing rapidly on her phone, occasionally glancing up at the unfolding scene. Thomas leaned down, his voice just low enough that only Maya could hear him clearly. You really should consider how your stubbornness is inconveniencing everyone. The boarding process is delayed. Other passengers are waiting, all because you won't be reasonable. Is this really the hill you want to die on? Maya met his gaze directly, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. I'm not dying on any hill, sir. I'm simply sitting in the seat I paid for. Part 3. Confrontation intensifies attempted seat reassignment. The lead flight attendant arrived, a woman in her mid-40s with an air of practiced authority. Her name tag read Sofia Martinez. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who had handled countless difficult situations at 30,000 feet. I understand there's a seating issue, she asked, looking between the standing Harringtons and Maya, her eyes quickly assessing the situation. There certainly is, Victoria said before anyone else could speak, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone accustomed to having complaints addressed immediately. We're Platinum Elite members who always sit in row 2, but today our seats have apparently been given away. She gestured toward Maya with a flick of her manicured fingers, as if indicating an inanimate object rather than a person. Sophia glanced at Maya, then at Brandon, who subtly tapped the boarding passes in his hand. She understood immediately. Let me check the documentation, she said, reviewing all 3 boarding passes with efficient precision. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, your assigned seats are 3B and 3C, not in row 2. Ms. Jackson is correctly seated in 2B. Thomas's expression hardened, the veneer of civility thinning noticeably. This is unacceptable. We've sat in row 2 on this route for the past 3 years. There's clearly been an error in the system. Someone has overridden our usual arrangement. I understand your preference, sir, Sophia replied professionally. But seat assignments are final once boarding passes are issued. Both row 2 and row 3 offer identical first-class amenities and service. Victoria looked as though she'd been slapped with a wet fish. We didn't pay extra for identical amenities. We paid for specific seats we always occupy. Her voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from surrounding passengers. I sympathize with your frustration, Sophia said, her tone remaining steady. But I cannot remove Ms. Jackson from her correctly assigned seat. Thomas lowered his voice, leaning towards Sophia with a conspiratorial air of someone about to propose an under-the-table arrangement. Perhaps we could speak privately about this matter. I'm sure there's a solution that would satisfy everyone involved. The suggestion hung in the air like an unpleasant odor, the implication that money, status, or influence could circumvent the rules that applied to everyone else. Sophia remained professional but firm, her spine straightening almost imperceptibly. Any conversation about seating would include all affected passengers. Mr. Harrington, there's no private solution to be reached here. Maya sat quietly, conscious of the growing tension, but determined not to be intimidated out of her rightful place. Her hands rested on her debate notes, drawing strength from the months of research about structural barriers and selective enforcement of rules. She was exactly where her boarding pass said she should be. The facts were on her side. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted noticeably. Other passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. The businessman across the aisle had removed his AirPods, tucking them into his breast pocket with deliberate movements. The woman in 1C had turned around in her seat to watch the unfolding drama. The older gentleman from 1D was now standing in the aisle, observing with undisguised interest, his arms crossed over his chest. Victoria, noticing the audience, switched tactics. Her voice softened to a tone of reasonable concern, though the steel beneath remained unmistakable. Sophia, we're simply trying to avoid confusion and disruption. The young lady might actually be more comfortable in economy, where the atmosphere might be more familiar to her. First class can be intimidating for first-time flyers. The implication hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Even passengers who had been neutral observers reacted to the thinly veiled suggestion. The woman in 1C let out an audible gasp. The businessman across the aisle frowned deeply, setting aside his laptop completely. Maya felt a familiar burn in her chest, the heat of humiliation mixed with righteous anger. The suggestion that she didn't belong in this space, that she should retreat to where her kind typically sat, carried echoes of segregation policies her grandmother had fought against. But her debate training kicked in again. This was exactly when composure mattered most. I purchased a first-class ticket, she said evenly, meeting Victoria's gaze without flinching. And I'm perfectly comfortable right here in my assigned seat. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing from her seat in 1F, spoke up, her voice carrying the measured precision of someone accustomed to courtroom proceedings. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. It sounds like the issue is quite straightforward. All passengers should occupy their assigned seats, regardless of status level or historical preference. Thomas's attention snapped to Dr. Rodriguez, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this new participant. This doesn't concern you, he said curtly, dismissing her intervention. Actually, Dr. Rodriguez replied, holding up her phone so the recording app was clearly visible. Discriminatory treatment in transportation services concerns everyone, which is why federal regulations exist to prevent it. As a civil rights attorney specializing in transportation equity, I find this interaction particularly relevant to ongoing cases. The word discriminatory landed like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples of tension spread through the first-class cabin as the confrontation was explicitly named for what it was. Several more phones appeared, their cameras discreetly positioned to record the interaction, creating a digital gallery of witnesses. Sophia recognized the escalating situation and made a swift decision. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, I must insist that you take your assigned seats in row 3 now. We need to complete boarding, and you're currently blocking the aisle. Thomas looked as though he might argue further, but a subtle change had occurred in the cabin's atmosphere. The audience that had formed was not on his side, and he sensed it. The social calculus had shifted, continuing to press the issue would only damage his image further in front of these witnesses. This is absolutely ridiculous, he muttered, but he began moving toward row 3, his shoulders rigid with suppressed anger. Victoria followed, radiating indignation with every click of her designer heels against the cabin floor. As they settled into their seats, just one row behind Maya, Victoria leaned forward and spoke just loudly enough to be heard by those nearby. Some people simply don't understand the appropriate order of things. It's what happens when standards disappear completely. Maya felt the comment like a physical blow, but kept her expression neutral, her debate training helping her maintain composure under pressure. She would not give Victoria the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Brandon approached with a bottle of water. Here you go. Ms. Jackson, welcome aboard. Can I get you anything else before takeoff? His small act of normalized service was a lifeline, an acknowledgement that she belonged exactly where she was, regardless of what the Harringtons believed. No, thank you. I'm all set, Maya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As Brandon moved on, Maya noticed Dr. Rodriguez giving her a subtle thumbs up from row 1. The gesture carried a clear message. You're handling this perfectly. Keep going. The confrontation had been diffused but not resolved. Maya could feel the Harringtons' resentment radiating from the row behind her, like heat from an open oven. This was merely a tactical retreat, not a surrender. They had been temporarily outmaneuvered but not convinced. Maya took a deep breath and looked out the window at the tarmac below. Ground crew in bright safety vests were loading the last of the luggage. Soon they would push back from the gate, and she would be airborne for the first time in her life. Despite the unpleasant confrontation, that reality still held its magic. She opened her debate notes, focusing on the familiar comfort of her arguments about structural barriers in contracts. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was currently experiencing exactly the type of barrier her research addressed: the selective enforcement of seemingly neutral policies based on assumptions about who belonged where. In the reflection of the window, Maya could see Victoria Harrington still glaring at the back of her head. The woman's lips were moving as she whispered furiously to her husband, probably formulating their next approach. Maya turned her attention back to her phones. The flight to New York would take less than 2 hours. She could endure anything for 2 hours. What she didn't realize was that the confrontation was far from over. It was merely gathering strength for its next phase. Public humiliation attempt. As the final economy passengers boarded, passing through the first-class cabin toward the back of the plane, Victoria Harrington seized the opportunity to escalate her grievance. She flagged down another flight attendant, not Brandon or Sophia, but an older woman who hadn't witnessed the previous confrontation. "Excuse me," Victoria called, her voice deliberately louder than necessary, ensuring it carried through the cabin. "We have a seating issue that wasn't properly resolved." Maya tensed but kept her eyes on her debate notes, pretending to be absorbed in her work. She could feel curious glances from other passengers and the steady weight of Victoria's hostility behind her. The flight attendant approached. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" Victoria launched into a revisionist version of events, her voice pitched to carry to nearby passengers. "We're Platinum Elite members who always sit in row 2, but today there seems to have been a mix-up in the system." She gestured toward Maya with a theatrical sweep of her hand. "This young lady has somehow ended up in our usual seat, and we're quite concerned about it." The implication was clear as crystal. Maya didn't belong there. Before the flight attendant could respond, Thomas joined in, his deeper voice adding gravitas to the complaint. "It's not just about preference. We specifically reserved those seats weeks ago. There's clearly been a mistake in the booking system." The new flight attendant looked uncertain, glancing between the Harringtons and Maya's back. "Let me check with my colleagues about this." As she left to consult with Sophia, Victoria raised her voice slightly, ensuring those around them could hear. "It's just so disappointing how standards have fallen across the board. When you pay premium prices, you expect a certain level of consistency in your fellow travelers." Maya felt her cheeks burning, but kept her eyes fixed on her notes, the words blurring slightly as she struggled to maintain her composure. She was determined not to engage, not to give Victoria the reaction she was clearly fishing for. From across the aisle, the businessman who had been watching the situation unfold spoke up unexpectedly. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you suggesting that certain passengers don't belong in first class based on what exactly their age, their appearance?" His voice carried genuine puzzlement mixed with an edge of challenge. Victoria's eyes widened at being directly confronted by another first-class passenger, clearly not part of her expected script. "I'm simply saying that some of us are regular first-class passengers who have earned certain courtesies through loyalty and status." She straightened her pearl necklace with manicured fingers. "There used to be recognition of that fact." "And some of us," came another voice from row 1, the older gentleman who had been observing with growing disapproval, "purchased our tickets just like everyone else and have every right to the seats we were assigned." Maya glanced up, surprised by these unexpected interventions. The older man was looking directly at Victoria, his expression stern but composed. "I didn't mean to suggest," Victoria began, but the older man cut her off with a raised hand. "I believe you did, madam, and I find it distasteful." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being heard without raising his volume. "As a retired airline pilot who flew for 37 years, I can assure you that the only qualification for sitting in any seat on this aircraft is a valid boarding pass and with that seat number on it. Period." A murmur of agreement rippled through the first-class cabin. Maya felt a surge of gratitude for these unexpected allies. Sophia returned with the other flight attendant. "Mrs. Harrington, as I explained earlier, all passengers are in their correct assigned seats. The matter is closed. Now, we need to prepare for departure." Victoria was not deterred. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Then, this is unacceptable. The captain is currently completing pre-flight preparations, Sophia replied firmly. And frankly, there's nothing to discuss. Seat assignments are final. Victoria, sensing her audience was not sympathetic, changed tactics again. She lowered her voice but ensured it remained just loud enough for Maya to hear. Thomas, I'm concerned about our experience today. You know how these people can behave when they're not accustomed to premium environments. I just hope we don't have any incidents during the flight. The comment hung in the air like poison. Maya's hands tightened on her debate notes, creasing the carefully prepared pages. The phrase "these people" burned in her ears, familiar and ugly in its implications. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly documenting the interaction on her phone, spoke again. Excuse me, Mrs. Harrington, but I believe your comments have crossed a line. They could be interpreted as creating a hostile environment based on perceived racial characteristics, which violates federal transportation anti-discrimination regulations. Victoria flushed, two bright spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. I said nothing about race. You're putting words in my mouth. Her voice had risen sharply, drawing even more attention. Intent versus impact is a fascinating legal distinction. Dr. Rodriguez replied calmly, one I'd be happy to discuss at length if you'd like to continue this conversation. My firm specializes in precisely these types of cases. Thomas placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Victoria, enough. We'll address this through the proper channels later. His eyes darted around the cabin, taking inventory of the numerous phones now openly recording the interaction. The proper channels. Maya knew what that meant, a strongly worded complaint that would twist the narrative, casting the Harringtons as victims of poor service rather than instigators of discrimination. But now there was video evidence from multiple angles that would contradict any such revisionist account. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence as the doors were closed and the safety demonstration began. Maya tried to focus on the flight attendant's practice movements, but she could feel the weight of the Harringtons' resentment radiating from the row behind her. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tasha. Did you board okay? Send me that first-class selfie. Maya hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about taking a photo. Would it appear to be gloating? Would it provoke further conflict with the Harringtons? But then she remembered her grandmother's words. Show them how it's done. Carefully, discreetly, she held up her phone and took a quick selfie against the window, the first-class seat clearly visible in the frame. She sent it to Tasha and her grandmother with a simple caption, "Made it, taking off soon." As she put her phone in airplane mode, Maya caught a glimpse of Victoria watching her with narrowed eyes, the woman's lips pressed into a tight line of disapproval. Maya turned to look out the window as the plane began to push back from the gate. Beyond the tarmac, the Atlanta skyline stretched toward the horizon, the familiar landscape she was leaving behind. Ahead lay New York City, the national championship, and the chance to prove herself on the biggest debate stage of her young career. She took a deep breath, feeling the plane's engines rumble to life beneath her. Whatever the Harringtons thought of her, whatever barriers they tried to place in her path, they couldn't stop this moment. She was going to New York. She was flying first class. She was exactly where she belonged. Allies began to emerge. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the tension in the first-class cabin remained palpable. Maya could hear Victoria Harrington whispering furiously to her husband, the words too low to distinguish but the hostile tone unmistakable as a rattlesnake's warning. The older gentleman who had identified himself as a retired pilot caught Maya's eye and gave her a reassuring nod. His intervention had shifted the dynamic in the cabin, and Maya was grateful for it. When the plane paused in the taxiway queue, the man leaned across the aisle. James Westbrook. He introduced himself quietly, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a Southern gentleman. 37 years with Delta before retiring. Started flying when segregated seating was still being challenged in interstate buses. Don't let them rattle you, young lady. You have every right to be here. Maya Jackson, she replied, extending her hand, which he shook with firm warmth. Thank you for speaking up. James nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I've seen this kind of thing too many times over the decades. People who think premium cabins should be reserved for certain types of passengers. He shook his head, silver hair catching the overhead light. Disgraceful. A ticket is a ticket. You paid for yours just like everyone else. From the row across from Maya, a younger white man in a business suit leaned over slightly. Aiden Parker, he said, extending his hand as well. Management consultant. I saw your boarding pass earlier. It clearly showed 2B. Don't let anyone make you feel unwelcome. Maya shook his hand, surprised by this growing circle of support. I appreciate that. I'm a weekly flyer on this route, Aiden continued, pushing his glasses up his nose with one finger. And I've seen how gate agents and flight attendants sometimes treat passengers differently based on, well, factors that shouldn't matter. It's not right, and it's certainly not legal. From row 4, a young Hispanic woman with a medical textbook in her lap leaned forward. Gabriela Sanchez. She introduced herself with a warm smile. Second-year medical student at Columbia. I just wanted to say I admire your composure. Many people would have lost their cool by now. Maya felt a wave of emotion, gratitude mixed with vindication. She wasn't alone in recognizing the injustice of the situation. Others saw it too and were willing to acknowledge it publicly. Thank you, she said simply, not trusting her voice for more elaborate expression. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing from row 1, turned to face the impromptu support group. I'm documenting this incident for potential follow-up, she said, her voice professional but warm. Miss Jackson, would you be willing to provide contact information after we land? This kind of selective enforcement of policies is precisely what transportation equity advocates are working to address. Of course, Maya agreed, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. What had begun as an attempt to isolate and humiliate her was transforming into something quite different, a moment of community building and collective witness. Behind her, Victoria Harrington made an audible sound of disgust. This is ridiculous. We're being ganged up on for simply expecting the service we've paid for. Aiden Parker raised an eyebrow. No, Ms. Harrington, you're experiencing pushback for attempting to displace someone from their rightfully purchased seat based on what appears to be personal bias. You know nothing about us, Thomas Harrington interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. I'm a senior partner at Harrington and Powell Law. We represent half the corporations in Atlanta. This kind of treatment is unconscionable. The attempted invocation of status and power fell flat in the face of the cabin's shifted dynamics. James Westbrook actually chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. I'm sure your law firm is very impressive, sir, but up here at 30,000 feet, the only authority that matters is the captain's. And the captain enforces one rule above all: assigned seats are assigned seats. The plane began its takeoff roll, the powerful thrust pushing everyone gently back into their seats. The confrontation paused as the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, the familiar landscape of Atlanta falling away below them. As they climbed through the clouds, Maya felt a curious sense of elevation that went beyond the physical. Something significant had happened in that cabin. Faced with injustice, strangers had become allies. They had chosen to speak rather than remain silent. They had created, in that small, pressurized tube hurtling through the sky, a momentary community based on fairness rather than status. Gabriela Sanchez caught her eye again and gave a subtle thumbs up. Aiden Parker nodded respectfully. James Westbrook winked, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. Dr. Rodriguez's expression conveyed professional approval. Even Brandon, passing through the cabin with the drink cart, gave her a look that conveyed clear support. For the first time since boarding, Maya felt herself truly relax. The physical tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders and neck began to ease. Her breathing deepened. Whatever the Harringtons might say or do for the remainder of the flight, she was not facing them alone. Others had seen the situation clearly and had chosen to stand with her, not because they knew her, but because they recognized an injustice and refused to be silent witnesses to it. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Maya returned to her debate notes with renewed focus. The topic, structural barriers in modern contracts, seemed more relevant than ever. She had just experienced firsthand how seemingly neutral policies could be selectively enforced based on assumptions about who belonged where. It was no longer abstract theory, it was lived reality. When Brandon reached her with the drink cart, he offered a warm smile. What can I get for you, Ms. Jackson? Cranberry juice, please, she replied, returning his smile. Of course, and would you like a warm towel? We'll be serving lunch shortly. The normal professional service was a balm after the tension of boarding. This was how things should be. Courteous, consistent treatment regardless of who was sitting in the seat. As Brandon moved on to the Harringtons row, Maya could hear the distinct chill in Victoria's voice as she ordered a sparkling water without so much as a please or thank you. Some people, it seemed, carried their biases with them even into the clouds. But up here at 30,000 feet, those biases had been named and challenged. For Maya Jackson, debate champion from Westwood High School in Atlanta, that felt like victory enough for one day. What she didn't realize was that the most significant confrontation and the most meaningful victory still lay ahead. Part 4. Knowledge is power. Maya's expertise revealed. The flight progressed with a fragile civility. Maya focused on her debate preparation, occasionally exchanging friendly glances with her newfound allies. The Harringtons maintained a frosty silence, their displeasure radiating from row 3 like a cold front before a storm. As lunch was being served, real china plates and metal cutlery, a distinct upgrade from the snack boxes Maya had expected, Thomas Harrington decided to try a new approach. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a condescending paternalism that made Maya's skin crawl. "Young lady," he said, addressing Maya's back, "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We're not upset with you personally. It's the airline system that's failed us all here." Maya turned slightly, acknowledging him without fully engaging. "I understand your frustration with not getting your preferred seats, sir." Thomas nodded, warming to his apparent reasonableness. "Exactly, Bon. And as someone who clearly doesn't fly first class regularly, you couldn't have known that some of us have established patterns and preferences. It's not your fault that the system didn't recognize our status." There it was again, the subtle dig, the implication that she was an interloper in a space where she didn't belong, the suggestion that status should override clear documentation. Maya felt her debate instincts kick in. This was a classic false premise that needed challenging. "With respect, Mr. Harrington, whether I fly first class regularly or not doesn't affect the validity of my ticket or assigned seat. The Contract of Carriage is quite clear on this point." Thomas's eyebrows rose, surprise briefly displacing his condescension. "Contract of Carriage," Maya nodded, shifting slightly in her seat to face him more directly. "Yes, the binding lead-in agreement between passengers and the airline. Section 21(3) specifically addresses seat assignments and the limited circumstances under which they can be changed after confirmation." From her seat in row 1, Dr. Rodriguez watched with growing interest, clearly impressed by Maya's knowledge. Thomas, a lawyer by profession, was not accustomed to being lectured on legal matters by teenagers. His expression hardened, jaw tightening visibly. "I'm familiar with the concept of contracts. Young lady, I've been practicing law since before you were born. Then you'll appreciate the importance of consistent enforcement," Maya replied calmly. "Selectively applying contract terms based on customer status or other factors undermines the very foundation of contract law. It creates structural barriers to equal access despite facially neutral language." Victoria, who had been listening with increasing irritation, could no longer contain herself. "This is absurd, Thomas. Why are you even engaging with this debate?" The word debate triggered something in Maya. She smiled slightly, a genuine expression for the first time since the confrontation began. "Actually, that's exactly what this is, Mrs. Harrington. A debate about the equitable enforcement of contract terms. It's quite literally my specialty." Sophia, who had been passing by with the coffee service, paused with evident interest. "I'm a competitive debater," Maya continued, her confidence growing as she moved into familiar intellectual territory. "My topic this year is structural barriers in modern contracts, specifically how seemingly neutral agreements can create hidden obstacles for certain groups through selective enforcement and unwritten exceptions." The cabin had gone quiet. Several passengers were openly listening to the exchange, including James, Aiden, and Gabriella. "Are you suggesting we're trying to discriminate against you?" Thomas asked, his tone carrying a warning edge. "I'm not suggesting anything about your intentions, Mr. Harrington," Maya replied diplomatically. I'm simply pointing out that attempting to displace me from my assigned seat based on status considerations represents exactly the kind of selective contract enforcement my research addresses. Dr. Rodriguez nodded appreciatively. Well articulated. That's precisely the kind of case pattern we're seeing in transportation equity cases nationwide. Thomas flushed, the color rising from his collar to his hairline. Being outmaneuvered by a teenager in his own professional domain was clearly not an experience he enjoyed. This isn't a classroom exercise. This is about customer service and appropriate accommodation of loyal passengers. It's actually about basic fairness, came James Westbrook's voice from row 1. And the young lady is exactly right about the contract of carriage. I've operated under those rules for nearly 4 decades. Aiden Parker joined in. As a business traveler who flies weekly, I've seen how status can create an informal 2-tier system of rule enforcement. It's problematic, to say the least, and potentially opens the airline to significant liability. Thomas looked around the cabin, realizing he was losing his audience. This isn't about... What I mean is, what my husband means, Victoria interjected sharply, is that some people simply don't understand how the real world works. There are written rules, and then there are understood conventions. People who belong in premium environments understand that. The phrase people who belong hung in the air like a thundercloud. Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the visceral reaction to being told, yet again, that she didn't belong in a space she had every right to occupy. But before she could respond, Sophia stepped in. Mrs. Harrington, I need to be very clear. Every passenger with a first-class ticket belongs in first class. There are no understood conventions that supersede our official policies. That kind of thinking is exactly what our company is working to eliminate from our corporate culture. Victoria's face flushed with anger. I'd like to speak to the captain immediately. The captain is currently flying the aircraft, Sophia replied firmly. But I'm the lead flight attendant, and I'm telling you that this conversation needs to end. Ms. Jackson is in her correctly assigned seat. The matter is closed. Maya turned back to her debate notes, but her mind was racing. This entire interaction would make a perfect case study for her presentation. It demonstrated exactly how coded language and appeals to unwritten conventions could be used to create barriers for certain passengers, despite the explicitly neutral language of the official contract. Behind her, she could hear Thomas attempting to mollify his fuming wife. Victoria, let it go. We'll file a formal complaint later. Maya couldn't help but smile slightly. A formal complaint about what? Exactly that they hadn't been allowed to displace another passenger from her assigned seat based on their status and her perceived lack of belonging. She almost hoped they would file it. The response would likely be educational for them. As the lunch service concluded and the cabin settled into the quiet rhythm of mid-flight, Maya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Gabriela Sanchez offering her a business card. I'm doing my residency in emergency medicine, Gabriela explained quietly. But I've also worked with a medical ethics group addressing equity in healthcare. Your points about selective enforcement of rules really resonated. If you ever want to apply your research to the medical field, please reach out. The parallels are striking. Maya accepted the card with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. I hadn't considered medical applications, but it makes perfect sense. Aiden Parker leaned across the aisle. Same goes for corporate contracts. The way certain clients get preferential terms while others face strict enforcement is a perfect example of your thesis. If you're ever interested in a summer internship, my firm could use your perspective. We're working to address exactly these issues in business practices. Maya felt a swelling sense of affirmation. Her research, her intellectual framework, her understanding of structural barriers, these weren't just academic exercises. They described real phenomena that affected real people in real contexts, and others recognized their value beyond the debate stage. This flight, which had begun as a simple journey to a debate competition, was transforming into something much more significant, a living demonstration of her thesis and an unexpected networking opportunity with professionals who recognized the importance of her work. As the plane continued its journey toward New York, Maya returned to her notes with renewed purpose. The national championship awaited, and now she had a powerful real-world example to incorporate into her presentation, an example that would transform theoretical arguments into lived reality, giving her words the undeniable authenticity that comes only from personal experience. She thought of her grandmother's words again. Show them how it's done. As Evelyn Jackson had been thinking of first-class travel, but Maya was now showing them how it was done in a much deeper sense, demonstrating intellectual rigor, personal dignity, and the power of knowing your rights in the face of those who would deny them. The power play backfires. Approximately halfway through the flight, Thomas Harrington decided to escalate matters. Maya noticed him summoning Brandon with an imperious gesture that somehow managed to be both subtle and demanding, the movement of someone accustomed to having staff materialize at his command. I need to speak with the captain, he said firmly when Brandon approached. This is a customer service issue that requires immediate attention. Brandon maintained his professional demeanor. Sir, the captain is currently flying the aircraft and cannot leave the cockpit for customer service matters. I'd be happy to address any concerns you have. This goes beyond your authority, Thomas insisted, his voice carrying the assurance of someone who regularly outranked those he spoke to. I'm a Platinum Elite member with serious concerns about how my wife and I have been treated today. Brandon's expression remained neutral, but Maya detected a slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign of his frustration. I understand, sir. What specific concerns would you like me to relay to the captain? Thomas glanced meaningfully at Maya. There's been a systematic failure in the seat assignment process that has disrupted our normal travel routine. As long-standing premium customers, we expect certain standards to be maintained. The implication was clear. Maya's presence was the disruption to their normal first-class experience. Brandon nodded diplomatically. I'll certainly pass your concerns along, Mr. Harrington. Is there anything else I can assist you with at the moment? Yes, Victoria interjected, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. We'd like it noted in our customer profile that we expect row 2 seats on all future flights. Some people simply don't know their place, but we certainly know ours. The phrase know their place rippled through the first-class cabin like an electric current. Maya felt her cheeks warm with a flush she couldn't control, but she kept her eyes on her notes, determined not to engage with such a blatant provocation. Dr. Rodriguez, however, had no such compunction. She lowered her phone, having apparently recorded the exchange, and turned in her seat. Mrs. Harrington, I feel compelled to point out that comments about people knowing their place have a specific and troubling historical context in this country, particularly when directed at young people of color. Victoria's face flushed. That's not what I meant. You're twisting my words. Intent is frequently less relevant than impact in discrimination cases. Rodriguez continued calmly. And the impact of suggesting that certain individuals don't belong in spaces where they have legally purchased access has been recognized by multiple courts as creating a hostile environment. Thomas stiffened visibly. Are you threatening legal action? Because I assure you, as a senior partner at Harrington and Powell, I'm quite familiar with the legal definition of hostile environment in Tuaslamat, and this doesn't qualify. I'm not threatening anything, Dr. Rodriguez replied evenly. I'm simply observing that your wife's comment about people knowing their place could be interpreted in a way that violates federal transportation anti-discrimination regulations. As someone who specializes in exactly these cases, I felt a professional obligation to point that out. More passengers were openly watching now, some discreetly recording on their phones. The confrontation had moved beyond a personal dispute into something more significant, a public debate about belonging, access, and the coded language of exclusion. Victoria, sensing the growing audience, attempted to reframe her comment. I was referring to seat assignments, not... People are so quick to make everything about race these days. It's exhausting. No one mentioned race. Mrs. Harrington, Dr. Rodriguez noted quietly. I simply referenced the historical context of telling people to know their place in American society. The trap was elegant and effective. By responding defensively about race when it hadn't been explicitly mentioned, Victoria had revealed the subtext of her own thinking. Thomas recognized the misstep immediately. He placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Victoria, that's enough. We'll address this through the proper channels. But the damage was done. The first-class cabin had become a silent courtroom, and the verdict in the court of public opinion was already forming. From the front of the cabin came the sound of a door opening. The captain had emerged from the cockpit, a tall man with silver hair and the composed demeanor of someone who who had navigated countless difficult situations. His name badge read Captain David Anderson. "I understand there's a situation that requires my attention," he said, his voice carrying natural authority. Thomas started to rise. "Captain, I'm glad you've come. We have serious concerns about—" Captain Anderson held up a hand, stopping Thomas mid-sentence. "Before we continue, I should inform everyone that I've been briefed on the situation by my crew, and I've received messages from our ground staff regarding the boarding process. I'm fully aware of what has transpired." Victoria paled slightly. The realization that the captain had been informed of their behavior, likely including their attempts to displace Maya and their subsequent comments, seemed to register as a serious setback. "Now," Captain Anderson continued, "I want to be absolutely clear about one thing on this aircraft. Every passenger with a valid boarding pass has an absolute right to their assigned seat, regardless of status level, flying frequency, or any other factor. There are no exceptions to this rule." He looked directly at the Harringtons. "If anyone finds that policy uncomfortable, I'd be happy to arrange alternate transportation for you upon landing." The implication was unmistakable. The Harringtons were the problem passengers, not Maya. Thomas's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That won't be necessary, Captain. We're simply expressing concerns about consistency in service." "Good," Captain Anderson replied. "Then I trust this matter is resolved. Jackson will remain in her assigned seat 2B, and we can all enjoy the remainder of our flight to New York." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Maya felt a profound sense of validation. The highest authority on the aircraft had publicly affirmed her right to be exactly where she was. Behind her, she could hear Victoria whispering furiously to Thomas. Their voices too low to distinguish words, but the tone unmistakably agitated. Their power play had backfired spectacularly, transforming them from self-perceived victims into publicly acknowledged antagonists. Maya returned to her debate notes with renewed focus, but her mind kept circling back to the interaction. This wasn't just about a seat assignment anymore. It had become a public referendum on who belonged in premium spaces and who had the right to enforce or challenge boundaries. It was her debate topic made manifest at 30,000 feet, with real stakes and real consequences. As the plane began its initial descent toward New York, Maya looked out the window at the approaching skyline. The iconic buildings pierced the clouds, a physical manifestation of aspiration and achievement. Somewhere down there, the National Youth Forensics Championship waited, a stage where she would argue passionately about the very dynamics she had just experienced firsthand. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had come seeking a championship, but she had already received something perhaps more valuable: lived experience that transformed academic theory into personal truth. The collective stand begins. As the plane began its approach to LaGuardia, Maya sensed a shift in the cabin's atmosphere. What had been individual expressions of support were coalescing into something more coordinated, more powerful. Passengers were exchanging glances, leaning across aisles for quiet conversations, forming an impromptu community in response to the Harringtons' behavior. Michael Reynolds, a tech executive in his early 40s who had been quietly observing from 4B, finally spoke up. "I fly this route weekly, Bump," he said, his voice carrying easily through the cabin. "And I've never seen such blatant attempts to make another passenger feel unwelcome. It's shameful, and it reflects poorly on all of us if we allow it to continue unchallenged." Victoria Harrington stiffened, her pearl necklace quivering with indignation. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This isn't about making anyone unwelcome. It's about respecting established patterns and loyal customer preferences." Michael's eyebrows rose. "Established patterns? You mean like expecting certain types of people to give up their seats to other types of people? That kind of established pattern." The historical echo was unmistakable, resonating with America's troubled history of segregated transportation. Several passengers nodded in recognition of the reference, including James Westbrook, whose expressions suggested he had witnessed such patterns firsthand during his decades as a pilot. "That's not what I meant," Victoria protested, but her objection rang hollow in the face of her earlier comments about people knowing their place. Sarah Thompson, a woman in her 50s seated in 5A who had identified herself earlier as a nurse practitioner, joined the conversation. "I've been listening to this entire interaction since boarding, and I have to say, if Ms. Jackson were removed from her rightful seat, I would have requested to be let off this flight. I won't be party to discrimination. even passively. Neither would I, added James Westbrook from row one, his southern accent growing more pronounced with emotion. Some things are worth taking a stand for, even when it's inconvenient. Same here, echoed Gabriela Sanchez, closing her medical textbook with finality. There are principles that transcend convenience. One by one, passengers began to voice their agreement. The sentiment rippled through the cabin. They would not silently accept injustice. They would stand, or in this case, refuse to fly, in solidarity with someone being unfairly treated. Maya was stunned by the show of support. These were strangers who owed her nothing, yet they were willing to disrupt their own travel plans rather than tacitly endorse discriminatory treatment. It was a powerful demonstration of collective action against injustice. Unfolding in the most unexpected setting, Thomas Harrington, a man accustomed to commanding rooms rather than being outnumbered in them, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loosening his tie slightly. A complete overreaction to a simple seating preference. But his protests were drowned out by the growing chorus of passengers expressing their unwillingness to tolerate the Harringtons' behavior. What had begun as isolated expressions of support had transformed into a cabin-wide rebuke of privilege and entitlement. Sophia Martinez, observing the situation with professional interest, approached Maya. "Are you doing all right?" she asked quietly, genuine concern in her eyes. Maya nodded, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. "I'm fine, thank you. I appreciate everyone's support, but I hope this doesn't escalate further. I don't want to cause any more disruption." Sophia smiled approvingly. "That's very mature of you. Some passengers in your position might be enjoying watching the Harringtons squirm." Maya considered this. "I'm not interested in making anyone uncomfortable. I just wanted to be treated fairly and occupy the seat I purchased. This isn't about punishing them, it's about upholding principles." "Well," Sophia replied, "I think you've taught everyone on this flight a valuable lesson about dignity under pressure, including me." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I'll be submitting a detailed report about this incident. The Harringtons' behavior has been completely unacceptable by any standard." As Sophia moved on to prepare the cabin for landing, Maya felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly. Relief that others had recognized and spoken against the injustice she'd experienced. But also a certain weariness. Maintaining composure in the face of hostility was exhausting, even with support. Dr. Rodriguez leaned across the aisle. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "what we're witnessing here is actually quite remarkable from a social psychology perspective. Bystander intervention at this scale, especially among strangers in a confined space, is relatively rare. People often default to silent discomfort rather than active solidarity." Maya nodded. "I've read about the bystander effect in psychology. People assume someone else will step in, so no one does." "Exactly," Rodriguez agreed. But something different happened here. One person spoke up, then another, creating permission for others to join. It's a powerful demonstration of how collective action emerges when someone breaks the initial silence. From behind Maya came Victoria's voice, tight with contained fury. "This is mob mentality, not collective action. You've all decided we're villains based on a completely distorted understanding of what happened." Michael Reynolds responded from row 4, his tone measured but firm. "Mrs. Harrington, we all witnessed what happened. You attempted to remove a young woman from her assigned seat because you felt entitled to it, despite having boarding passes for different seats. When that failed, you made comments implying she doesn't belong in first class and should know her place. There's no distortion here, just facts." The plane began its final approach, the landing gear descending with a mechanical thump that momentarily paused the conversation. As they dropped below the clouds, the vast expanse of New York City spread out beneath them, a complex grid of human ambition, achievement, conflict, and coexistence. Maya looked out the window, suddenly struck by the parallel. What had played out in the small, pressurized cabin was a microcosm of larger societal dynamics, the enforcement of unwritten rules about who belonged where, the courage required to challenge those rules, and the power of collective witness and action against injustice. As the runway approached, Maya took a deep breath. Whatever happened next, whether the Harringtons offered sincere apologies unlikely or doubled down on their behavior more probable, she had already won a more significant victory than any debate trophy could represent. She had stood her ground with dignity, articulated the principles at stake, and catalyzed a moment of collective consciousness among strangers. The wheels touched down with a squeal of rubber on concrete. They had arrived in New York City, but the journey that had begun in Atlanta had delivered Maya to an unexpected destination, a profound real-world validation of her research, her principles, and her right to occupy any space she had legitimately accessed. As the plane taxied to the gate, Maya prepared for disembarkation, carefully gathering her debate materials. The national championship awaited, but she already carried with her a victory more meaningful than any she had imagined when boarding in Atlanta. Part 5, The Turning Point, Corporate Intervention. As the plane approached the gate, a new development unfolded. Sofia Martinez received a call on the aircraft's internal communication system. Her expression shifted from professional neutrality to surprise as she listened to the message. "I understand," she said. "We'll handle it appropriately." She turned to Brandon, speaking quietly but not quite quietly enough to prevent Maya from overhearing. "Corporate is aware of the situation. Apparently, videos from boarding have already reached their social media team. They're sending a customer service director to meet the flight." Brandon's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual." "Unprecedented is the word I'd use," Sophia replied. "But so is this situation." As the plane docked at the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LaGuardia Airport. Local time is 2:47 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 76 degrees. We've been advised that a customer service representative will be meeting our flight. We ask that all passengers remain seated until further instructions." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the cabin. Airline corporate representatives meeting a flight was highly unusual and typically reserved for major service disruptions or VIP passengers. Victoria Harrington smiled triumphantly at Thomas. "Finally, someone who understands customer loyalty is getting involved." Her satisfaction was short-lived. When the aircraft door opened, a woman in her mid-30s with a tablet and an airline executive badge entered. Her professional attire and composed demeanor suggested significant authority. Her name badge read Rachel Foster, Customer Service Manager. Rachel conferred briefly with Sophia, reviewing information on her tablet. She then addressed the first-class cabin. "Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Foster from SkyEast Corporate Customer Service. I've been made aware of a situation that occurred during boarding and continued during this flight. Before we proceed with deplaning, I need to speak with the passengers involved." Thomas Harrington raised his hand. "That would be us, Ms. Foster. My wife and I are Platinum Elite members, and we've experienced completely unacceptable service today." Rachel nodded professionally. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, I understand you have concerns. I also need to speak with Ms. Jackson." She looked directly at Maya. "Would you three be willing to step into the jet bridge with me for a brief conversation before deplaning continues?" Maya nodded, gathering her belongings. The Harringtons did the same, Thomas straightening his tie with the confidence of someone who expected vindication. As they moved toward the door, Dr. Rodriguez spoke up. "Excuse me, Ms. Foster. I've documented the interactions on this flight and would be willing to provide that documentation if it would be helpful. I'm a civil rights attorney specializing in transportation equity." Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. That would be very helpful. Would you join us as well?" The four passengers followed Rachel into the jet bridge, where a small area had been cleared for their conversation. Rachel positioned herself professionally, tablet at the ready. "First, I want to thank you all for your cooperation. I understand there were issues regarding seat assignments and subsequent interactions that caused concern. I'd like to hear from each of you about what occurred." Thomas immediately launched into his version of events. "My wife and I are Platinum Elite members who always sit in row 2 on this road. Today, due to an obvious system error, our usual seats were assigned to another passenger." He gestured dismissively toward Maya. "We simply requested that the error be corrected, and we've been treated like criminals ever since." Rachel listened attentively, making notes on her tablet. "I see, Miss Harrington. Do you have anything to add?" Victoria nodded emphatically. "The issue isn't just the seats themselves. It's the complete disregard for customer loyalty and status. We spend over $50,000 annually with this airline. That should count for something. Rachel turned to Maya. Ms. Jackson, could you share your experience? Maya took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts as she would for a debate. I purchased a first-class ticket for seat 2B. During boarding, gate agent Patricia Whitfield attempted to reassign me to economy, claiming my seat was inoperable, despite assigning first-class seats to other passengers right in front of me. When I boarded with my valid boarding pass, Mr. and Ms. Harrington insisted I should be moved because they always sit in row 2, despite having boarding passes for row 3. Rachel nodded, taking notes. And the subsequent interactions during the flight, Maya continued calmly, Mrs. Harrington made several comments suggesting I didn't belong in first class and should know my place. Mr. Harrington attempted to involve the captain to have me removed from my assigned seat. Several other passengers intervened in support of my right to remain in my assigned seat. That's a complete distortion, Victoria interrupted. I never mentioned anything about her race. Interesting that you immediately leaped to that defense when Ms. Jackson didn't mention race at all. Dish Rodriguez observed quietly. Rachel held up a hand. Dr. Rodriguez, you've documented these interactions. Yes, the attorney replied, producing her phone. I began recording at the gate when I observed Mr. Whitfield's disparate treatment of Mr. Jackson compared to other first-class passengers. I continued documenting key interactions during the flight, including Mrs. Harrington's comments about people knowing their place and belonging in premium environments. Rachel reviewed some of the footage, her expression growing increasingly concerned. She looked up at the Harringtons. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, the documentation I'm reviewing doesn't align with your characterization of events. In fact, it appears that you attempted to displace another passenger from her legitimately assigned seat based on your status and preference rather than actual ticket assignments. Thomas's confident expression faltered. The videos don't capture the full context. As Platinum Elite members, Rachel interrupted firmly. Mr. Harrington, Platinum Elite status provides many benefits, including priority boarding, complimentary upgrades when available, and bonus miles. What it does not provide is the right to displace other passengers from their assigned seats. Victoria flushed with anger. So loyalty means nothing to this airline, is that what you're saying? On the contrary, Rachel replied, loyalty means a great deal to us, but so does treating all of our passengers with dignity and respect, regardless of their status level or how frequently they fly. She turned to Maya. Ms. Jackson, on behalf of SkyEast Airlines, I want to offer our sincere apologies for your experience today. This falls far below our service standards, and we will be addressing it comprehensively. Maya nodded. Thank you. Rachel then returned her attention to the Harringtons, her tone shifting from apologetic to authoritative. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, I need to inform you that your behavior today constitutes a violation of our passenger code of conduct. Creating a hostile environment for other passengers is grounds for review of your customer status. Thomas blanched. Are you threatening to revoke our Platinum Elite status over a simple seating misunderstanding? This was not a simple misunderstanding, Rachel replied firmly. Based on the documentation I've reviewed, including gate agent notes, flight crew reports, and passenger videos, this was a deliberate attempt to intimidate another passenger out of her assigned seat, followed by comments that created a hostile environment based on perceived belonging. She continued, we will be conducting a full investigation, and you will be notified of any changes to your customer status. In the meantime, I want to be absolutely clear. SkyEast does not tolerate discriminatory behavior from our staff or our passengers. Victoria's face had transformed from indignant to alarmed. The reality was dawning on her. This interaction wasn't going to be resolved with a perfunctory apology and courtesy vouchers. There would be actual consequences for their behavior. Surely this is an overreaction, Thomas began, slipping into his professional tone. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, without the presence of your other parties. He glanced meaningfully at Maya and Dr. Rodriguez. Rachel's expression remained firm. There's nothing further to discuss at this time. Mr. Harrington, we'll be in contact regarding the outcome of our investigation. She turned to Maya and Dr. Rodriguez. Thank you both for your patience and cooperation. You're free to deplane now, again. Ms. Jackson, please accept our sincere apologies for your experience. As Maya and Dr. Rodriguez moved toward the terminal, leaving the Harringtons with Rachel Foster, Maya felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that the airline had taken the situation seriously, vindication that her perspective had been heard and validated, but also a certain weariness from the emotional toll of the confrontation. "You handled that beautifully," Dr. Rodriguez commented as they walked. "Many people twice your age wouldn't have maintained such composure." Maya smiled slightly. "Debate training, control the emotion. Focus on facts, maintain composure." "Well, it served you well today," Dr. Rodriguez replied, "and I suspect it will continue to serve you throughout your life." As they emerged into the bustling terminal of LaGuardia Airport, Maya checked her phone. She had multiple texts from Tasha and her grandmother, both eager to hear about her flight experience. She also had messages from her debate coach and teammates, confirming their meeting location. The national championship awaited, but Maya carried with her now something more valuable than any preparation materials: lived experience that transformed academic theory into personal truth. Her debate topic, structural barriers in modern contracts, had manifested in real time, complete with attempts at enforcement, resistance, and ultimate accountability. As she navigated through the terminal toward her waiting teammates, Maya reflected on the unexpected journey that had unfolded at 30,000 feet. She had boarded a plane in Atlanta as a debate champion heading to a competition. She would join her team in New York as someone who had not just studied structural barriers, but confronted and overcome them with dignity, knowledge, and the unexpected alliance of strangers who recognized injustice and refused to be silent witnesses to it. The domino effect. While Maya was reuniting with her debate team, the incident on Flight 1108 was spreading through digital channels with remarkable speed. Dr. Rodriguez, with Maya's permission, had shared selected clips from her recordings with transportation equity advocates in her professional network. A passenger from economy class who had witnessed the boarding confrontation had posted about it on Twitter. James Westbrook, the retired pilot, had written a detailed LinkedIn post about the incident, citing his decades of airline experience to contextualize the significance of what he'd observed. Within hours, the hashtag Justice in the Air was trending nationally. The details varied slightly across platforms, but the core narrative remained consistent. A young black debate champion had been targeted for removal from her legitimately purchased first-class seat by gate agents and entitled passengers. The clips showed Maya's composed responses, the Harringtons' increasingly transparent hostility, and the collective stand by other passengers. One particularly damning clip captured Victoria's comment about people knowing their place, followed by the retired pilot's rebuttal invoking the history of segregated transportation. The story resonated because it touched on themes that extended far beyond air travel: who belongs in premium spaces, who gets the benefit of the doubt, whose contracts are enforced strictly, and whose are treated as flexible. It was about the unwritten rules that govern access and belonging in American society, rules that often operate beneath the surface of officially neutral policies. By the time Maya and her teammates gathered for dinner to prepare for the next day's competition, the incident had reached SkyEast's corporate headquarters. The airline's social media team had flagged the growing online discussion as a potential crisis situation, with posts accumulating at an alarming rate. This is exactly what selective policy enforcement looks like: textbook discrimination captured on video, #Justice in the Air. 47,000 likes. Watch how calmly this teenager dismantles elite entitlement with nothing but knowledge of the Contract of Carriage. I'm in awe. #Justice in the Air, 32,500 likes. The moment when the entire plane basically says, "If she goes, we all go," is giving me life today. #Justice in the Air. 85,700 likes. In a glass-walled conference room 50 floors above Manhattan, SkyEast's Vice President of Customer Experience, Diane Powell, addressed the assembled crisis team. "The videos are unambiguous," she said gravely, gesturing to the multiple screens displaying social media metrics. "We have a gate agent attempting to remove a young woman from her purchased first-class seat without cause, followed by 2 elite status passengers continuing the harassment on board. This is exactly the kind of incident that can define a company's reputation for years to come." The social media director nodded solemnly. "We're tracking over 2.3 million impressions already, with engagement rates 5 times our normal benchmarks. This isn't just going away. The general counsel leaned forward. The legal exposure here is significant. Dr. Rodriguez is a well-known transportation equity attorney with connections to several major civil rights organizations. If she decides to pursue this as a civil rights case, we could be looking at substantial damages. Diane turned to the chief of operations. What happened with gate agent Whitfield? How did this situation even occur? The COO consulted his notes. Based on preliminary investigation, it appears that the Harringtons, our Platinum Elite passengers, approached Agent Whitfield before boarding and requested their usual seats. When she informed them those seats were already assigned, they pressured her to find a solution, rather than simply explaining that seat assignments were final. She attempted to remove Miss Jackson from her legitimately purchased seat using a false claim about the seat being inoperable. And this happened in full view of other passengers, some of whom were recording, Diane asked incredulously. Unfortunately, yes. Agent Whitfield has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The VP of Communications spoke up. The story is gaining traction across platforms. It's not just about this specific incident anymore. It's becoming a conversation about systematic biases in how we treat different types of customers. We need to respond quickly and substantively. Diane nodded decisively. Here's what we're going to do. First, I want a personal call to Ms. Jackson offering a complete refund of her ticket price, vouchers for future travel, and an immediate upgrade to our highest loyalty status tier. Second, I want a comprehensive review of our seat assignment protocols and staff training, with a specific focus on equitable treatment of all passengers regardless of status level, race, or other factors. Third, I want a public statement acknowledging what happened, taking full responsibility, and outlining specific steps we're taking to prevent similar incidents in the future. She looked around the room. This isn't just about damage control. This is about living up to our stated values as a company. If we claim to treat all customers with dignity and respect, then we need to ensure our systems and staff actually do that, consistently and without exception. As the corporate response machine shifted into high gear, Maya was unaware of the ripple effects emanating from her experience. She was focused on the national championship, reviewing her arguments, and preparing for the preliminary rounds that would begin the next morning. Her debate coach, Dr. Rivera, had listened to her account of the flight with a mixture of concern and pride. Maya, she said thoughtfully, you've just experienced firsthand exactly what your research addresses. How do you think this will affect your presentation? Maya considered the question carefully. It makes everything more immediate. Before, I understood structural barriers intellectually. Now, I understand them viscerally, how they feel in the moment, how they operate through coded language and selective enforcement, how they rely on bystander silence to be effective. Dr. Rivera nodded. And how allies can disrupt them through collective action and witness. Exactly, Maya agreed. I think my presentation will be stronger for it, more authentic, more grounded in lived reality. While they continued their preparation, Maya's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She excused herself to answer it. Hello, Maya Jackson speaking. Miss Jackson, this is Diane Powell, Vice President of Customer Experience at Sky East Airlines. I'm calling regarding your experience on Flight 1108 today. Maya was momentarily speechless. A corporate vice president was calling her directly. I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received from our gate agent and the subsequent situation on board. Diane continued. What you experienced falls far below our service standards and our values as a company. Thank you, Maya replied, finding her voice. I appreciate that. We're taking this incident very seriously, Diane assured her. Agent Whitfield has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We're also implementing an immediate review of our seat assignment protocols and staff training. Maya listened as Diane outlined the concrete steps the airline was taking in response to a complete refund of her ticket price, vouchers for future travel, and an immediate upgrade to their highest loyalty status tier. But what caught her attention most was the final part of the conversation. Ms. Jackson, I understand you're a debate champion competing on the topic of structural barriers in contracts. Our legal team would actually be very interested in your perspective on how our contract of carriage and its enforcement might inadvertently create or reinforce such barriers. Would you be open to a conversation with them after your competition concludes? The request stunned Maya. Her research and perspective were being valued at the highest corporate level. Yes, I'd be interested in that conversation. Excellent. We'll arrange it at your convenience, Diane replied. And Ms. Jackson, thank you for handling this situation with such remarkable composure and dignity. Many passengers in your position would have responded very differently. After ending the call, Maya rejoined her debate team, sharing the unexpected development. Their reactions ranged from amazement to vindication. You're going to consult with an airline's legal team, her teammate Marcus exclaimed. That's incredible. Rivera smiled proudly. This is why I always emphasize real-world applications in our debate preparation. Maya's research isn't just theoretical. It has practical implications for how companies operate and how people experience those operations. As they returned to their competition preparations, Maya's phone continued to buzz with notifications. The story was spreading, with each retelling amplifying its significance. What had begun as a personal confrontation was transforming into a public conversation about access, belonging, and accountability. Social media engagement continued to grow exponentially. The hashtag first class equality had joined hashtag justice in the air as users shared their own experiences of discriminatory treatment in transportation, retail, healthcare, and other consumer contexts. Celebrities and politicians joined the conversation, many expressing support for Maya and calling for greater accountability in how companies enforce their contracts. Transportation Secretary Alejandro Martinez issued a statement announcing a department-wide review of airline practices regarding seat assignments and passenger treatment. Every traveler deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The statement read, "The Department of Transportation is committed to ensuring that airline policies are implemented consistently and fairly for all passengers." Professional organizations were responding as well. The American Bar Association released guidance on equitable contract enforcement for its members. The National Association of Consumer Advocates announced a special task force focused on discriminatory practices in transportation services. Corporate America took note. Several major airlines proactively announced reviews of their own seating protocols and staff training, eager to avoid becoming the next Sky East. Retail chains issued statements reaffirming their commitment to consistent policy enforcement, regardless of customer demographics. Hotel groups emphasized their non-discrimination policies in customer service interactions. Industry publications explored the business implications of the incident. Aviation Weekly ran a cover story titled "The Cost of Bias: How Discriminatory Practices Damage Brand Value and Customer Trust." Harvard Business Review published an analysis of the hidden expenses associated with maintaining informal, two-tier service systems. The rapid expansion of media coverage created a curious disconnection for Maya. While she was fully focused on delivering her championship debate presentation, her name and story were circulating through news cycles, talk shows, and policy discussions across the country. When she finally checked her phone after being named National Youth Forensics Champion, the volume of notifications was overwhelming. Interview requests from major networks, messages of support from civil rights leaders, invitations to speak at corporate events about consumer equity. Dr. Rivera helped her navigate this unexpected attention. "You don't have to respond to any of this immediately," she advised. "Focus on celebrating your championship victory. Everything else can wait until you're ready to engage with it." Maya appreciated the guidance. The debate championship had been her goal for months, the reason she had purchased that first-class ticket in the first place. She wanted to savor the achievement before addressing the broader conversation that had emerged from her journey to New York. As she prepared to return to Atlanta, Maya reflected on the strange confluence of events that had transformed a seat assignment dispute into a national dialogue about belonging, access, and accountability. She had come to New York as a debater with a theoretical understanding of structural barriers. She would return home as someone whose lived experience had catalyzed tangible change in how those barriers were perceived and addressed. Victory and vindication. The day after winning the National Youth Forensics Championship, Maya awoke to find her hotel room filled with flower arrangements. They had been arriving steadily since her victory the previous day, congratulatory bouquets from family members, her debate team, and increasingly from organizations and individuals she had never met. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund congratulates Maya Jackson on her championship victory and her courage in standing up for equal treatment. Read one card. Thank you for demonstrating that knowledge of your rights is the most powerful tool for ensuring they're respected, said another, from the Consumer Rights Advocacy Network. Even SkyEast Airlines had sent an arrangement. With a note from CEO James Wilson. Congratulations on your well-deserved championship. Your dignity and composure have taught our company valuable lessons about living up to our stated values. Maya sat on the edge of her hotel bed, trying to process the extraordinary chain of events. Just days ago, she had been a debate champion, preparing for the biggest competition of her young life. Now she was being hailed as a symbol of consumer rights, racial equity, and dignified resistance to discrimination. Her phone rang. It was Grandmother Evelyn. Baby girl, her grandmother's voice came through, brimming with pride. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Pastor Williams mentioned you in his sermon yesterday. Mrs. Taylor from my bridge club saw you on Good Morning America. The whole neighborhood is just bursting with pride. Maya smiled. They mentioned me on Good Morning America. I haven't even been watching the news. Child, you're everywhere, Evelyn exclaimed. And not just for standing up to those people on the plane, though Lord knows that was something to see, but for winning that debate championship too. You showed them excellence comes in all packages. That's what I'm most proud of. Not just that you stood your ground, but that you went on to win the whole competition. As Maya packed her belongings for the return flight to Atlanta, she reflected on her grandmother's words. The unexpected attention stemming from the flight incident had not overshadowed her academic achievement. Rather, the two narratives had become intertwined in a powerful way. She had demonstrated both theoretical knowledge and practical application, intellectual rigor and moral courage. Dr. Rivera knocked on her door. Maya, you have quite a few university representatives asking to meet with you before you leave New York. I've scheduled brief meetings with those that seemed most promising. Are you up for it? Maya looked up, surprised. University representatives. But I'm only a junior. Early recruitment, Dr. Rivera explained with a smile. Word of your debate performance, combined with the publicity from the flight incident, has caught the attention of some very prestigious institutions. They're eager to court you now, even though applications won't be due for months. Throughout the day, Maya met with admissions representatives from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, and several other top universities. Each expressed admiration for both her debate championship and her poised handling of the discrimination she had faced. Your research on structural barriers in contracts displays remarkable sophistication, noted the Harvard representative. And the way you maintained your composure while experiencing exactly what your research addresses shows exceptional character and intellectual integrity. Harvard values students who can translate theoretical understanding into real-world application. By day's end, Maya had received preliminary scholarship offers from 17 universities, including full-ride opportunities from 7 Ivy League schools. The academic doors opening before her were far beyond what she had imagined possible when she boarded that flight from Atlanta just days earlier. But perhaps the most meaningful personal impact came in the form of messages from young people who saw themselves reflected in her experience. Teenagers from across the country reached out through social media, sharing their own stories of being questioned, challenged, or made to feel unwelcome in spaces where they had every right to be. Watching you stand up for yourself with such dignity gave me courage to do the same, wrote a high school student from Detroit. Yesterday, when a store security guard followed me around assuming I was shoplifting, I calmly cited their customer non-discrimination policy instead of just feeling humiliated. Thank you for showing me how knowledge is power. As Maya prepared for her return flight, upgraded to first class by the airline, with assurances of VIP treatment, she started a notes file on her phone. The messages she was receiving highlighted patterns of experience that deserved thoughtful analysis. Perhaps there was a book here, or a follow-up research project, or the foundation for future advocacy work. Her debate coach had always emphasized that the most powerful arguments connected abstract principles to lived realities. Maya now had the opportunity to build that connection for others, helping translate individual experiences into systematic understanding and potentially meaningful change. Before heading to the airport, Maya started a blog titled Contract Theory in Real Life, where she planned to explore how seemingly neutral agreements created different outcomes for different people. Her first post, What Happened on Flight 1108, provided a measured analytical account of her experience, focusing on the systematic issues it revealed rather than personal grievance. Within hours of publishing, the blog had received over 10,000 views and hundreds of comments. Academic publishers expressed interest in developing her analysis into a book. Consumer rights organizations requested permission to use her framework in their advocacy materials. Law professors asked to incorporate her case study into their curriculum. For Maya Jackson, debate champion from Westwood High School in Atlanta, the personal impact of standing her ground on Flight 1108 was transforming from overwhelming attention into purposeful opportunity. What had begun as a difficult confrontation was evolving into a platform for meaningful contribution to important conversations about fairness, access, and accountability. As she boarded her return flight, greeted by name by every crew member, treated with meticulous courtesy, Maya reflected on her grandmother's instruction to show them how it's done. She had done exactly that, in ways neither of them could have anticipated. And in the process, she had discovered new dimensions of her own voice and its potential impact on the world. Part 6, The Aftermath, begins immediate consequences. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 1108, SkyEast Airlines held a press conference to announce the full implementation of what they were officially calling the Jackson Protocol. Maya had given permission for her name to be associated with the initiative, seeing it as an opportunity to transform a personal experience into institutional change. The airline's CEO, James Wilson, stood before a room of journalists, industry representatives, and consumer advocates. Maya sat in the front row alongside Dr. Rodriguez, who had continued to advise her through the aftermath of the incident. Today marks an important milestone in our company's evolution. Wilson began, The events on Flight 1108 exposed serious flaws in how we trained our staff, implemented our policies, and responded to customer concerns. The Jackson Protocol represents our commitment to addressing these issues systematically and transparently. He outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented across the airline's operations. Uniform enforcement of seating policies regardless of status, level, or demographic factors. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, with regular recertification requirements. Revision of the elite status program to eliminate informal courtesies that created two-tier policy enforcement. Establishment of an independent review board to assess complaints of discriminatory treatment. Transparent documentation of all seat reassignment decisions with required justification based on specific operational, safety, or security concerns. These changes won't be easy or inexpensive to implement, Wilson acknowledged, but they represent an investment in a more equitable customer experience and a more ethical corporate culture. Following the press conference, other airlines began announcing similar initiatives. Delta, American, and United all introduced enhanced training programs focusing on equitable policy enforcement. Smaller carriers followed suit, recognizing that the public's expectations had fundamentally shifted. The Department of Transportation formalized its investigation into the incident, with Patricia Whitfield and the Harringtons receiving official notices requesting their testimony. The scope of the investigation extended beyond the specific events on Flight 1108 to examine broader patterns of selective enforcement across the airline industry. Consumer rights organizations mobilized around the momentum created by the incident, launching campaigns promoting Know Your Travel Rights education. They developed easily accessible guides explaining the fine print of airline contracts of carriage and established hotlines for reporting discriminatory treatment. Maya found herself invited to participate in these initiatives, offering her perspective as both a student of contract theory and someone who had experienced selective enforcement firsthand. Though still focused on her academic responsibilities, she accepted select opportunities to contribute to the broader conversation about consumer equity. What happened to me wasn't unique, she emphasized in an interview with Consumer Reports that reached 3.7 million readers. What was unusual was the combination of factors that made it visible: multiple witnesses recording the interaction, my knowledge of the contract of carriage terms, and the subsequent viral spread of the videos. Most incidents of selective enforcement happen without this level of documentation and attention. The legal consequences extended to the Harringtons as well. Thomas faced a formal ethics investigation by the State Bar Association, focusing on his conduct during the flight and his attempt to use his professional status to intimidate Maya. The investigation would ultimately result in a 6-month suspension of his license to practice law, a significant professional setback for a senior partner. Victoria's social exile from Atlanta's elite circles continued to deepen. Her membership application to an exclusive country club was quietly declined. Former friends declined her invitations to social functions. The charity board she had once dominated now excluded her from leadership roles. For Patricia Whitfield, the gate agent whose actions had initiated the incident, the consequences were equally significant. Her termination from Sky East was accompanied by a formal note in her employment record detailing the policy violations that led to her dismissal. Other airlines, now hypersensitive to issues of discriminatory treatment, were reluctant to hire someone associated with such a high-profile incident. The industry-wide impact continued to expand. Aviation industry conferences featured panels on equitable policy enforcement and mitigating bias in customer service interactions. Flight attendant training programs incorporated case studies based on Flight 1108, teaching crews how to recognize and interrupt discriminatory treatment. Perhaps most significantly, independent auditors began conducting equity testing across airlines, sending passengers of different demographics with identical reservations to document whether they received consistent treatment. The resulting data revealed troubling patterns that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents. The Jackson Protocol quickly became more than just a Sky East policy. It emerged as a framework for addressing selective enforcement across consumer services. Retail chains, hotels, financial institutions, and healthcare providers adapted its principles to their own contexts. Recognizing that consistent policy enforcement wasn't just an ethical imperative, but a business advantage in an increasingly diverse marketplace. For Maya Jackson, watching these developments unfold was both validating and sobering. Her individual stand for basic fairness had catalyzed meaningful change at multiple levels, from corporate policies to regulatory oversight to public awareness. But the work of transforming systems built on unwritten expectations about who belonged where was just beginning. As she prepared for her senior year of high school, Maya continued developing her research on structural barriers in contracts, now informed by both academic theory and lived experience. The personal had become professional, the theoretical had become practical, and a seat assignment dispute had evolved into a case study in how individual dignity could challenge and ultimately transform systems of inequality. Arrival in New York. When Maya's flight landed at LaGuardia, her phone immediately buzzed with messages from her debate teammates. They had already checked into the hotel and were waiting anxiously for her arrival. The preliminary rounds of the National Youth Forensics Championship would begin early the next morning, and they were eager to complete their final preparations as a team. Navigating through the bustling terminal, Maya felt a curious mix of emotions. The confrontation on the flight had been stressful and draining, but it had also left her with a profound sense of validation. She had stood her ground with dignity, articulated her rights clearly, and witnessed corporate accountability in real time. As she emerged into the arrivals area, Maya spotted her debate coach, Dr. Rivera, waiting with a small sign bearing the Westwood High logo. Dr. Rivera was a former national champion herself, with a reputation for developing students who could combine intellectual rigor with real-world relevance. Maya, Dr. Rivera called, waving her over. "We've been following your adventure via text updates. Are you all right?" Maya nodded, adjusting her carry-on bag. "I'm fine. It was intense, but also illuminating in ways I hadn't expected." Dr. Rivera's expression was a mixture of concern and pride. "From what you've described, you handled it beautifully. You applied exactly what we've practiced, maintaining composure, focusing on facts, articulating principles rather than personalizing the conflict." As they made their way to the waiting taxi, Dr. Rivera mentioned something unexpected. "You should know that your flight experience has already reached the debate community. Several coaches and judges have mentioned it." Maya looked up, surprised. "Really, how?" "Social media," Dr. Rivera explained. "Apparently, one of the passengers recognized you as a national debate qualifier and posted about the incident. It's becoming something of a talking point among the forensics crowd." Maya wasn't sure how to feel about this development. On one hand, it was unsettling to have a personal experience circulating as public knowledge. On the other hand, the incident directly illustrated the very themes she would be addressing in her debate presentation. At the hotel, Maya's teammates greeted her with a mixture of concern and excitement. "Is it true a civil rights lawyer recorded the whole thing?" asked Marcus, one of her fellow debaters. "Did they really try to claim your seat was broken when it wasn't?" Zoe inquired, pushing her glasses up her nose. "We saw it trending on Twitter with hashtag justice in the air," added Jamal, pulling out his phone to show her the rapidly growing hashtag. Maya held up her hands, overwhelmed by the barrage of questions. Yes, and wait, it's trending on Twitter." Jamal nodded, scrolling through his feed. "It started with a few posts from passengers on your flight, but it's gained in momentum over the past few hours. People are sharing similar experiences they've had." Dr. Rivera intervened, sensing Maya's fatigue. "All right, team, Maya will have plenty of time to share details later. Right now, we need to focus on tomorrow's preliminary rounds. Our first matchups have been posted, and we have strategies to finalize." The team reluctantly shifted their attention back to debate preparation, but the undercurrent of excitement about Maya's experience remained palpable. They gathered in Dr. Rivera's hotel suite, spreading their research materials across the beds and desk as they reviewed their arguments one final time. As they worked, Maya's phone buzzed with notifications from her social media accounts. People she hadn't spoken to in years were messaging her, asking if she was that Maya Jackson from the flight incident. Media outlets were sending interview requests. Even her former middle school principal had reached out with words of support. The digital ripples of her experience were spreading far beyond what she could have anticipated. What had begun as a personal confrontation was rapidly transforming into a public conversation about access, belonging, and accountability. Maya silenced her phone, refocusing on her debate preparation. Tomorrow's competition was the culmination of months of research and practice. Whatever was happening in the digital sphere could wait. Right now, she needed to be present for her team and ready to deliver the arguments she had crafted so carefully. As they wrapped up their preparation session, Dr. Rivera pulled Maya aside for a private word. "Maya, I want you to know that you're under no obligation to discuss what happened on that flight if you don't want to. Your privacy matters." Maya appreciated the concern but shook her head slightly. "I think it's actually important to address it, especially given my debate topic. It would be strange to argue about structural barriers in contracts without acknowledging that I just experienced one firsthand." Dr. Rivera nodded. "If you decide to incorporate it, do so strategically. Use it as a concrete example that illustrates your theoretical framework, but don't let it overshadow your research. Balance personal experience with empirical evidence." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Maya agreed. The incident perfectly demonstrates how seemingly neutral policies can be selectively enforced based on assumptions about who belongs where. It's a vivid illustration of my central thesis. "Well then," Dr. Rivera smiled, "it seems you've been given a powerful rhetorical gift, albeit through challenging circumstances. Use it wisely." As Maya prepared for bed that night, she reviewed her opening statement one last time. The words on the page now carried deeper resonance, informed by lived experience. Tomorrow, she would step onto the national stage not just with theoretical arguments, but with the authentic voice of someone who had confronted structural barriers and maintained her dignity in the process. The debate competition. The National Youth Forensics Championship venue buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of the country's top high school debaters gathered for the preliminary rounds. The converted convention center had been transformed into a labyrinth of makeshift debate rooms, each equipped with podiums, timers, and seats for judges and small audiences. Maya arrived with her teammates, dressed in her navy blazer and carrying her meticulously organized research binder. Despite the exhausting events of the previous day, she felt remarkably focused. Perhaps it was because her recent experience had given her arguments a new dimension, a lived reality that transcended academic theory. As teams checked in, Maya began to notice curious glances and whispered conversations. Word had spread through the debate community about her flight experience, creating an unusual buzz around her presence. "Don't let it distract you," Dr. Rivera advised. Noticing Maya's awareness of the attention, "Channel it into your presentation if it feels relevant. But remember why you're here, to make the strongest possible case based on evidence and logic." Maya nodded, centering herself as she reviewed her opening arguments one last time. Her first-round opponent would be a formidable challenger from a prestigious private school in Massachusetts, last year's runner-up in the national championship. When her name was called for the first round, Maya took a deep breath and entered the assigned room. The three judges looked up from their scoring sheets, their expressions betraying a flicker of recognition. Even they had heard about Flight 108. Maya arranged her materials on the podium with practiced precision, then looked up to meet the judge's eyes directly. My topic today is structural barriers in modern contracts, specifically how seemingly neutral agreements can create hidden obstacles for certain groups through selective enforcement and unwritten exceptions. She paused briefly, making a split-second decision about how to acknowledge what everyone in the room already knew. Yesterday, while traveling to this competition, I experienced firsthand what happens when contract terms are selectively enforced based on perceptions about who belongs in certain spaces. While I could spend my time detailing that personal experience, I believe it's more valuable to examine the broader patterns it exemplifies and the empirical evidence that demonstrates their systematic nature. With that simple acknowledgement, Maya smoothly transitioned into her prepared arguments, presenting statistics, legal precedents, and theoretical frameworks with remarkable clarity. But now, these academic elements were illuminated by the subtle resonance of lived experience. When she discussed how neutral language could be weaponized through selective enforcement, the judges nodded with deeper understanding. Her opponent presented strong counter-arguments, suggesting that disparate outcomes in contract enforcement could be attributed to factors other than structural barriers. But Maya's rebuttal was masterful, drawing on both her research and her fresh perspective to dismantle each alternative explanation. The data consistently shows that identical contract violations result in different enforcement outcomes depending on the perceived status or group membership of the individual involved. She argued, this cannot be explained by random variation, misunderstanding of terms, or communication failures. The pattern is too consistent, too predictable, and too closely aligned with existing social hierarchies. When the round concluded, Maya could tell from the judge's expressions that she had made a powerful impression. As she gathered her materials to leave, one judge, a law professor from Columbia, broke protocol slightly to comment. That was an exceptionally well-argued case, Ms. Jackson. Throughout the day, Maya advanced through 3 preliminary rounds, each victory more decisive than the last. Her teammates performed admirably as well, with Westwood High School emerging as one of the top contenders in the tournament. Between rounds, Maya received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Daniela Rodriguez, who had flown with her from Atlanta. I hope you don't mind my stopping by, the attorney said. I wanted to see how you were doing after everything that happened yesterday. That's very kind of you, Maya replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. I'm actually doing well. In a strange way, the experience has strengthened my debate presentation. Rodriguez nodded understanding. That makes perfect sense. There's a profound difference between intellectual knowledge and lived experience. You now have both, which gives your arguments a resonance that purely theoretical understanding can't match. She hesitated, then added, I should also let you know that the airline has reached out to me regarding my documentation of the incident. They're taking this very seriously, more seriously than I've seen companies respond to similar situations in the past. Maya wasn't sure how to feel about this information. On one hand, she was glad the airline was taking accountability. On the other hand, the expanding consequences felt somewhat overwhelming. I just want to focus on the competition right now, she admitted. Everything else can wait until after the finals. Of course, Dr. Rodriguez agreed. I didn't mean to distract you, but I thought you should know that your stand is already creating positive change. That's something to be proud of, regardless of how the competition turns out. As the day's competition concluded, Maya's performance had earned her a spot in the next morning's semifinal round, one step away from the championship stage. Her coach and teammates celebrated the achievement with a quick dinner at a nearby restaurant, deliberately keeping conversation focused on debate strategies rather than the viral attention surrounding Maya's flight experience. In her hotel room that evening, Maya delivered her semifinal presentation to her mirror one last time, fine-tuning her phrasing and gestures. As she practiced, she realized how much more authentic her arguments felt now. What had been abstract concepts were now grounded in personal truth. What had been theoretical understanding was now experiential knowledge. When she finally laid down to sleep, Maya felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened in tomorrow's final rounds, she had already gained something invaluable from this journey. She had lived her research topic in a way few debaters ever experienced, and she had discovered within herself a strength and clarity she hadn't known she possessed. The next morning, Maya advanced through her semifinal round with unanimous judges' approval. Her final opponent would be a senior from a prestigious private school in California, a polished debater with national recognition and multiple championships to his credit. As she stepped onto the stage for the championship round, Maya saw that the audience had grown considerably. Not just other debate teams and coaches, but media representatives and education officials as well. The room hummed with anticipation. Maya delivered her opening statement with poised confidence, weaving together statistical evidence, legal precedents, and theoretical frameworks into a compelling narrative about structural barriers in modern contracts. When she touched briefly on her personal experience from Flight 1108, the room grew utterly silent, the audience hanging on every word. Her opponent was formidable, presenting sophisticated counterarguments about consumer choice, market pressures, and individual accountability. But in the rebuttal phase, Maya systematically dismantled each point, demonstrating how individual choices operated within systems that were neither neutral nor equally accessible to all. The myth of the perfectly informed consumer, exercising unconstrained choice, ignores the reality of power imbalances in contract formation and enforcement. She argued, when identical contract violations result in different consequences based on who committed them, we're no longer in a realm of neutral enforcement. We're in a realm of structural discrimination disguised as objective policy. When the judges announced their decision, it was unanimous. Maya Jackson was the National Youth Forensics Champion with the highest score in the competition's history. As she accepted the trophy, Maya thought of her grandmother, who had pressed those carefully saved dollars into her palm with instructions to show them how it's done. She had done exactly that, in ways neither of them could have imagined. She had not only stood her ground with grace and intelligence on Flight 1108, she had transformed that experience into a championship-winning argument about the very principles at stake. The victory wasn't just about winning a debate competition. It was about demonstrating how personal dignity and intellectual rigor could transform challenging experiences into powerful advocacy. It was about using her voice not just for personal vindication, but to illuminate patterns that affected countless others who hadn't been heard. As reporters gathered for the press conference following her victory, Maya prepared to speak not just as a debate champion, but as someone whose lived experience had catalyzed a national conversation about belonging, access, and accountability in American society. Part 7, The Ripple Effects. Systemic changes begin. 6 months after the incident on Flight 1108, the Jackson Protocol had spread from Sky East to become an industry standard, with 6 major airlines and dozens of smaller carriers adopting its guidelines for equitable policy enforcement. The protocol's core principles, transparent documentation, consistent application, and unbiased implementation of contract terms, had proven both practical to implement and beneficial to corporate reputations. Independent auditors conducted regular equity testing across airlines, documenting significant improvements in consistent treatment regardless of passenger demographics. Test subjects of different ages, races, and apparent socioeconomic status were now receiving remarkably similar responses when presenting identical scenarios to airline staff. The Department of Transportation's investigation had concluded with a comprehensive report that cited the Flight 1108 incident as emblematic of broader patterns of selective contract enforcement in transportation services. The report led to new federal guidelines requiring airlines to document all seat reassignments and policy exceptions, creating an unprecedented level of transparency in an industry previously known for its opaque decision-making processes. Maya Jackson, now preparing for her freshman year at Harvard Law School with a full scholarship, continued to play a role in these developments. Her blog, Contract Theory in Real Life, had grown into a respected platform for analyzing how seemingly neutral agreements operated differently across demographic groups. Corporate compliance officers, consumer advocates, and legal scholars regularly cited her analysis in their own work. Patricia Whitfield, the former gate agent, had undergone an unexpected transformation of her own, After her termination from Sky East, she had initially responded with bitterness and denial. But as the evidence of her actions became inescapable, Patricia began a process of genuine self-reflection. She now worked with a corporate training firm, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale in workshops about unconscious bias. I had internalized certain assumptions about who belonged in premium spaces, she explained during a transportation equity conference where she and Maya both spoke. When I saw a young black woman in line for first class, I automatically looked for reasons to question her presence there, even though her documentation was completely in order. The Harringtons had faced significant personal and professional consequences. Thomas's 6-month suspension from practicing law had damaged both his income and his standing at Harrington and Powell. Several corporate clients, concerned about association with a partner who had demonstrated such poor judgment in a public setting, had quietly moved their business elsewhere. Victoria's social ostracism in Atlanta's elite circles continued. Though she had begun attending diversity and inclusion workshops through her church, friends reported a gradual softening in her previously rigid attitudes. Though she had made no public statement about the incident, the most significant systemic change, however, was the spread of Jackson Protocol principles beyond aviation to other consumer contexts. Retail chains implemented new training programs focused on consistent enforcement of return policies. Hotels adopted transparent documentation requirements for room upgrades and policy exceptions. Financial institutions revised their customer service protocols to ensure equivalent treatment across demographic groups. Consumer advocacy organizations had developed standardized methodologies for documenting potential discrimination in service interactions, inspired by Dr. Rodriguez's careful recording of the Flight 1108 incident. Their Know Your Rights educational campaigns taught consumers how to recognize and challenge selective enforcement of contract terms. Even the academic world had been influenced by the incident and its aftermath. Harvard Law School, where Maya would begin her studies in the fall, had developed a case study based on Flight 1108 for its courses on consumer rights and discrimination. Business schools incorporated the incident into their ethics curriculum, examining how unwritten expectations about who belonged in premium spaces could undermine officially neutral policies. The ripple effects extended to government policy as well. 6 state legislatures had passed new consumer protection laws specifically addressing selective enforcement of contract terms. The Federal Trade Commission had issued enhanced guidelines on fair business practices, citing the airline industry's reforms as a model for other sectors. Maya herself had established the Fly High Foundation with some of the settlement funds she had received from Sky East, providing travel scholarships to low-income students competing in academic competitions across the country. The foundation ensured that financial constraints wouldn't prevent talented young people from participating in opportunities for growth and recognition. For the consumers most affected by selective enforcement practices, these changes represented tangible improvements in daily experiences. Complaints about discriminatory treatment in airlines had decreased by 73% in the 6 months following the implementation of the Jackson Protocol. Similar trends were beginning to emerge in retail, hospitality, and financial services as those industries adopted comparable standards. The most profound systemic change, however, was less tangible but equally significant: the shift in public discourse about contract enforcement. What had previously been dismissed as individual misunderstandings or customer service failures was increasingly recognized as part of broader patterns that required systematic attention. Maya's experience had provided a clear, compelling example that helped people recognize patterns they might previously have dismissed as coincidence or overreaction. It had created a framework for understanding how seemingly neutral policies could produce discriminatory outcomes through selective enforcement. As she packed for her move to Cambridge to begin law school, Maya reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple desire to arrive well-rested for a debate competition. What had started as a personal stand for dignity had evolved into a movement for accountability that was reshaping how contracts were enforced across multiple industries. Her grandmother's instruction to show them how it's done had yielded results far beyond anything either of them could have imagined. Media coverage expands. The media narrative surrounding Flight 1108 evolves significantly over time, expanding from initial viral social media content to in-depth analysis of the systemic issues it represented. What had begun as a compelling personal story quickly transformed into a framework for examining broader patterns of inequality in everyday consumer experiences. CNN featured a segment titled First Class Fairness: How a Teen Debater Exposed Airline Discrimination, exploring how Maya's knowledge of the Contract of Carriage had enabled her to challenge selective enforcement. The segment included interviews with legal experts who explained how seemingly neutral contract terms could create barriers through inconsistent application. The New York Times published an analysis piece examining the dual contract phenomenon, where the same terms are enforced differently depending on who attempts to invoke them. The article cited Maya's case as a textbook example, noting that what distinguished Jackson's experience was not that it happened. Such incidents occur daily across consumer contexts, but that it was so thoroughly documented and effectively challenged. Even international outlets like the BBC had picked up the story, framing it within a broader context of American social dynamics. Their documentary, Contracting Class in America, used the Flight 1108 incident as a starting point for exploring how consumer rights varied in practice despite equality in written agreements. Social media engagement with the story continued to expand exponentially. The hashtags #JusticeInTheAir and #FirstClassEquality had generated over 12 million posts across platforms, with users sharing their own experiences of discriminatory treatment in transportation, retail, healthcare, and other consumer contexts. Celebrities and politicians joined the conversation, many expressing support for Maya and calling for greater accountability in how companies enforce their contracts. Several prominent figures shared their own experiences of being questioned or challenged in spaces where they had every right to be. The story resonated because it touched on themes that extended far beyond air travel: who belongs in premium spaces, who gets the benefit of the doubt, whose contracts are enforced strictly, and whose are treated as flexible. It was about the unwritten rules that govern access and belonging in American society, rules that often operate beneath the surface of officially neutral policies. Industry publications explored the business implications of the incident. Aviation Weekly ran a cover story titled "The Cost of Bias: How Discriminatory Practices Damage Brand Value and Customer Trust." Harvard Business Review published an analysis of the hidden expenses associated with maintaining informal, two-tier service systems, noting that the Jackson incident demonstrates how the short-term benefits of preferential treatment for select customers can be dramatically outweighed by the long-term costs of perceived discrimination. Television talk shows frequently invited Maya to discuss her experience, but she was selective about her appearances, choosing platforms that allowed for substantive discussion rather than sensationalism. When she did appear, she consistently steered the conversation towards systemic issues rather than personal grievance. "What happened to me happens to people every day in different contexts," she explained during an interview with 60 Minutes that reached 14.7 million viewers. "The difference was that I had the language to name it, the knowledge to challenge it, and witnesses who recorded it. Most people experience these barriers without those advantages." Educational channels developed content based on the incident, creating accessible explanations of consumer rights and contract enforcement. One particularly popular by Mitu, Know Your Rights lessons from Flight 1108, had been viewed over 8 million times and was being incorporated into high school social studies curricula across the country. Law journals published academic analyses of the case, examining its implications for contract theory, consumer protection, and civil rights enforcement. The Yale Law Journal's article, "Selective Enforcement as Structural Barrier," cited Maya's experience as a paradigmatic example of how seemingly neutral policies could reinforce existing social hierarchies through discretionary application. The media coverage created a feedback loop that amplified the incident's impact. As more people learned about Maya's experience, more shared their own similar stories, creating a growing body of evidence that made it increasingly difficult to dismiss selective enforcement as isolated incidents rather than systematic patterns. For Maya, navigating this media attention required careful balance. She was committed to using her platform to advance understanding of structural barriers, but wary of becoming defined solely by one incident. She consistently emphasized her academic research and future goals alongside discussion of Flight 1108. "While my experience on that flight catalyzed important conversations," she noted in a Washington Post op-ed, "the underlying issues have existed for generations. Our focus should be not on one incident, but on the countless similar experiences that go undocumented and unchallenged every day." This thoughtful approach earned her respect from serious journalists and policy analysts, who increasingly sought her perspective not just on the flight incident, but on broader questions of contract enforcement, consumer rights, and equitable access. By the time Maya began her studies at Harvard Law School, the media narrative had evolved from teen stands up to airline discrimination to a more nuanced exploration of how structural barriers operate through seemingly neutral agreements. What had begun as a viral moment had transformed into a substantive national conversation about who benefits from selective enforcement and who bears its costs. For Maya Jackson, this evolution represented exactly what she had hoped for, not personal celebrity, but meaningful engagement with the systemic issues her experience had illuminated. Personal impact. The day after winning the National Youth Forensics Championship, Maya awoke to find her hotel room filled with flower arrangements. They had been arriving steadily since her victory the previous day, congratulatory bouquets from family members, her debate team, and increasingly from organizations and individuals she had never met. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund congratulates Maya Jackson on her championship victory and her courage in standing up for equal treatment. Read one card. Thank you for demonstrating that knowledge of your rights is the most powerful tool for ensuring they're respected, said another from the Consumer Rights Advocacy Network. Even Sky East Airlines had sent an arrangement with a note from CEO James Wilson. Congratulations on your well-deserved championship. Your dignity and composure have taught our company valuable lessons about living up to our stated values. Maya sat on the edge of her hotel bed, trying to process the extraordinary chain of events. Just days ago, she had been a debate champion preparing for the biggest competition of her young life. Now she was being hailed as a symbol of consumer rights, racial equity, and dignified resistance to discrimination. Her phone rang. It was grandmother Evelyn. Baby girl. Her grandmother's voice came through, brimming with pride. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Pastor Williams mentioned you in his sermon yesterday. Mrs. Taylor from my bridge club saw you on Good Morning America. The whole neighborhood is just bursting with pride. Maya smiled. They mentioned me on Good Morning America. I haven't even been watching the news. Child, you're everywhere, Evelyn exclaimed. And not just for standing up to those people on the plane, though Lord knows that was something to see, but for winning that debate championship too. You showed them excellence comes in all packages. As Maya packed her belongings for the return flight to Atlanta, she reflected on her grandmother's words. The unexpected attention stemming from the flight incident had not overshadowed her academic achievement. Rather, the two narratives had become intertwined in a powerful way. She had demonstrated both theoretical knowledge and practical application, intellectual rigor and moral courage. Dr. Rivera knocked on her door. Maya, you have quite a few university representatives asking to meet with you before you leave New York. I've scheduled brief meetings with those that seemed most promising. Are you up for it? Maya looked up, surprised. University representatives, but I'm only a junior. Early recruitment. Rivera explained with a smile. Word of your debate performance, combined with the publicity from the flight incident, has caught the attention of some very prestigious institutions. They're eager to court you now, even though applications won't be due for months. Throughout the day, Maya met with admissions representatives from Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, and several other top universities. Each expressed admiration for both her debate championship and her poised handling of the discrimination she had faced. Your research on structural barriers in contracts displays remarkable sophistication, noted the Harvard representative, and the way you maintained your composure while experiencing exactly what your research addresses shows exceptional character and intellectual integrity. Harvard values students who can translate theoretical understanding into real-world application. Wanted by day's end, Maya had received preliminary scholarship offers from 17 universities, including full-ride opportunities from 7 Ivy League schools. The academic doors opening before her were far beyond what she had imagined possible when she boarded that flight from Atlanta just days earlier. But perhaps the most meaningful personal impact came in the form of messages from young people who saw themselves reflected in her experience. Teenagers from across the country reached out through social media, sharing their own stories of being questioned, challenged, or made to feel unwelcome in spaces where they had every right to be. Watching you stand up for yourself with such dignity gave me courage to do the same, wrote a high school student from Detroit. Yesterday, when a store security guard followed me around assuming I was shoplifting, I calmly cited their customer non-discrimination policy instead of just feeling humiliated. Thank you for showing me how knowledge is power. As Maya prepared for her return flight, upgraded to first class by the airline, with assurances of VIP treatment, she started a notes file on her phone. The messages she was receiving highlighted patterns of experience that deserved thoughtful analysis. Perhaps there was a book here, or a follow-up research project, or the foundation for future advocacy work. Her debate coach had always emphasized that the most powerful arguments connected abstract principles to lived realities. Maya now had the opportunity to build that connection for others, helping translate individual experiences into systematic understanding and, potentially, meaningful change. Before heading to the airport, Maya started a blog titled Contract Theory in Real Life, where she planned to explore how seemingly neutral agreements created different outcomes for different people. Her first post, What Happened on Flight 1108, provided a measured, analytical account of her experience, focusing on the systematic issues it revealed rather than personal grievance. Within hours of publishing, the blog had received over 10,000 views and hundreds of comments. Academic publishers expressed interest in developing her analysis into a book. Consumer rights organizations requested permission to use her framework in their advocacy materials. Law professors asked to incorporate her case study into their curriculum. For Maya Jackson, debate champion from Westwood High School in Atlanta, the personal impact of standing her ground on Flight 1108 was transforming from overwhelming attention into purposeful opportunity. What had begun as a difficult confrontation was evolving into a platform for meaningful contribution to important conversations about fairness, access, and accountability. As she boarded her return flight, greeted by name by every crew member, treated with meticulous courtesy, Maya reflected on her grandmother's instruction to show them how it's done. She had done exactly that, in ways neither of them could have anticipated, and in the process, she had discovered new dimensions of her own voice and its potential impact on the world. Part 8, Accountability and Transformation. Industry accountability. 3 weeks after the incident on Flight 1108, Sky East Airlines held a press conference to announce the full implementation of what they were officially calling the Jackson Protocol. Maya had given permission for her name to be associated with the initiative, seeing it as an opportunity to transform a personal experience into institutional change. The airline's CEO, James Wilson, stood before a room of journalists, industry representatives, and consumer advocates. Maya sat in the front row alongside Dr. Rodriguez, who had continued to advise her through the aftermath of the incident. Today marks an important milestone in our company's evolution, Wilson began, his voice carrying the gravity of genuine commitment rather than corporate damage control. The events on Flight 1108 exposed serious flaws in how we trained our staff, implemented our policies, and responded to customer concerns. The Jackson Protocol represents our commitment to addressing these issues systematically and transparently. He outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented across the airline's operations, uniform enforcement of seating policies regardless of status, level or demographic factors, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, with regular recertification requirements, revision of the elite status program to eliminate informal courtesies that created two-tier policy enforcement, establishment of an independent review board to assess complaints of discriminatory treatment, transparent documentation of all seat reassignment decisions with required justification based on specific operational, safety, or security concerns. The announcement represented an unprecedented level of corporate accountability in the airline industry. Most companies faced with similar incidents typically offered generic apologies and vague promises to do better. Sky East was instead implementing specific, measurable changes with clear mechanisms for ongoing assessment and improvement. These changes won't be easy or inexpensive to implement, Wilson acknowledged, showing financial projections that indicated a $47 million investment over the first year alone. But they represent an investment in a more equitable customer experience and a more ethical corporate culture. And frankly, they're the right thing to do. Following the press conference, other airlines began announcing similar initiatives. Delta, American, and United all introduced enhanced training programs focusing on equitable policy enforcement. Smaller carriers followed suit, recognizing that the public's expectations had fundamentally shifted. The Department of Transportation formalized its investigation into the incident, with Patricia Whitfield and the Harringtons receiving official notices requesting their testimony. The scope of the investigation extended beyond the specific events on Flight 1108 to examine broader patterns of selective enforcement across the airline industry. This case has created a unique opportunity to address long-standing issues in how aviation policies are implemented, noted the DOT's lead investigator in an internal memo that was later made public. Ms. Jackson's experience provides a clear example of how seemingly neutral policies can be selectively enforced based on perceptions about who belongs in certain spaces. Consumer rights organizations mobilized around the momentum created by the incident, launching campaigns promoting Know Your Travel Rights education. They developed easily accessible guides explaining the fine print of airline contracts of carriage and established hotlines for reporting discriminatory treatment. Maya found herself invited to participate in these initiatives, offering her perspective as both a student of contract theory and someone who had experienced selective enforcement firsthand. Though still focused on her academic responsibilities, she accepted select opportunities to contribute to the broader conversation about consumer equity. What happened to me wasn't unique, she emphasized in an interview with Consumer Reports that reached 3.7 million readers. What was unusual was the combination of factors that made it visible: multiple witnesses recording the interaction, my knowledge of the contract of carriage terms, and the subsequent viral spread of the videos. Most incidents of selective enforcement happen without this level of documentation and attention. The legal consequences extended to the Harringtons as well. Thomas faced a formal ethics investigation by the State Bar Association, focusing on his conduct during the flight and his attempt to use his professional status to intimidate Maya. The investigation would ultimately result in a 6-month suspension of his license to practice law, a significant professional setback for a senior partner. Victoria's social exile from Atlanta's elite circles continued to deepen. Her membership application to an exclusive country club was quietly declined. Former friends declined her invitations to social functions. The charity board she had once dominated now excluded her from leadership roles. For Patricia Whitfield, the gate agent whose actions had initiated the incident, the consequences were equally significant. Her termination from Sky East was accompanied by a formal note in her employment record detailing the policy violations that led to her dismissal. Other airlines, now hypersensitive to issues of discriminatory treatment, were reluctant to hire someone associated with such a high-profile incident. 6 months after the incident, the Department of Transportation issued its formal findings, concluding that Sky East had engaged in discriminatory practices through selective enforcement of its contract of carriage. The airline, already implementing the Jackson Protocol, accepted the findings without contest and agreed to additional monitoring of its compliance with federal non-discrimination regulations. The industry-wide impact continued to expand. Aviation industry conferences featured panels on equitable policy enforcement and mitigating bias in customer service interactions. Flight attendant training programs incorporated case studies based on Flight 1108 teaching crews how to recognize and interrupt discriminatory treatment. Perhaps most significantly, independent auditors began conducting equity testing across airlines, sending passengers of different demographics with identical reservations to document whether they received consistent treatment. The resulting data revealed troubling patterns that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents. What the Jackson case did, explained a transportation equity researcher during a congressional hearing on consumer protection, was provide a clear, compelling example that helped people recognize patterns they might previously have dismissed as coincidence or overreaction. It created a framework for understanding how seemingly neutral policies can produce discriminatory outcomes through selective enforcement. For Maya Jackson, watching these developments unfold was both validating and sobering. Her individual stand for basic fairness had catalyzed meaningful change at multiple levels, from corporate policies to regulatory oversight to public awareness. But the work of transforming systems built on unwritten expectations about who belonged where was just beginning. As she prepared for her freshman year at Harvard Law School, Maya continued developing her research on structural barriers in contracts, now informed by both academic theory and lived experience. The personal had become professional, the theoretical had become practical, and a seat assignment dispute had evolved into a case study in how individual dignity could challenge and ultimately transform systems of inequality. Personal transformations. While institutional changes unfolded across the airline industry, equally significant transformations were occurring for the individuals involved in the Flight 1108 incident. Brandon Miller, the flight attendant who had initially hesitated to challenge the Harringtons' behavior, sent Maya a handwritten letter 2 weeks after the flight. "I want to apologize for not intervening more quickly when you were being treated unfairly," he wrote, his neat penmanship filling 3 pages of high-quality stationery. "Like many people in customer service roles, I've been trained to prioritize appeasing high-status customers, even when their demands are unreasonable. Watching you stand your ground with such composure made me examine my own complicity in systems that treat people differently based on perceived status or belonging." Brandon explained that he had requested to be included in SkyEast's enhanced bias training program and had started a support group for crew members focused on recognizing and reporting discriminatory treatment. "Your courage has inspired many of us to be more conscious of how we enforce policies and whose comfort we prioritize," he concluded. Maya appreciated his honesty and replied with encouragement for his efforts. His willingness to acknowledge his initial hesitation and commit to growth reflected exactly the kind of personal transformation needed to support broader systemic change. Dr. Rodriguez's involvement with the case had unexpected professional implications as well. Her documentation of the incident and subsequent advocacy had raised her profile in transportation equity circles. She received invitations to consult with airlines, train customer service teams, and contribute to policy development at the federal level. "Maya," she said during one of their regular check-in calls, "I've been working on transportation discrimination cases for years, but none has created the momentum for change that yours has. Would you be interested in an internship with our firm next summer? Your perspective would be invaluable to our advocacy work." Maya accepted enthusiastically. The opportunity to translate her academic research into practical advocacy aligned perfectly with her emerging career interests. Even Patricia Whitfield, the gate agent whose actions had initiated the incident, underwent a significant personal journey. After her termination from SkyEast, she initially responded with denial and anger, insisting she had been made a scapegoat for systemic issues. But as video evidence of her selective enforcement circulated widely, Patricia was forced to confront her own biases. 6 months after the incident, she gave an interview to a local news station in Atlanta, acknowledging her discriminatory treatment of Maya. "I had internalized certain assumptions about who belonged in premium spaces," she admitted. "When I saw a young Black woman in line for first class, I automatically looked for reasons to question her presence there, even though her documentation was completely in order." Patricia explained that she was now working with a corporate training firm, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale in workshops about unconscious bias. "I'm trying to turn my mistake into a learning opportunity for others," she said. "If my story helps other customer service professionals recognize and interrupt their own biases, perhaps some good can come from my failure." The Harringtons' transformation was more reluctant but equally profound. Thomas, faced with professional censure from his law firm and the state bar, eventually recognized the untenable nature of his position. After initially attempting to defend his actions as simple customer advocacy, he finally issued a public apology to Maya. "My behavior on Flight 1108 was inexcusable," he acknowledged in a statement released through his law firm. "I allowed entitlement and bias to override basic decency and respect for another passenger's rights. I am committing to a process of education and reflection to ensure I never repeat such behavior." Victoria's journey toward accountability was slower and less public. The social ostracism she experienced in Atlanta's elite circles, where she had once been a queen bee, forced her to reconsider how she had wielded status as a weapon throughout her life. While she made no public statement about the incident, friends reported that she had begun attending diversity and inclusion workshops through her church, a significant shift for someone who had previously dismissed such initiatives as unnecessary political correctness. For Maya, these individual transformations were perhaps even more meaningful than the institutional changes. Systems were built by people, maintained by people, and could only be truly transformed when the people within them changed their perspectives and behaviors. Her own transformation was equally significant. The shy but brilliant debate champion who had boarded that flight to New York had returned to Atlanta with new confidence in her voice and its potential impact. She had always understood structural barriers intellectually. Now she understood them viscerally, how they operated, how they could be challenged, and how that challenge could catalyze change. Maya's academic focus expanded beyond competitive debate to include practical advocacy. She started a Know Your Rights Club at Westwood High School, teaching students how to navigate systems that might subject them to unequal treatment. She developed workshops on contract literacy, helping people understand the agreements that govern their daily interactions with businesses and institutions. Her college essays, now being eagerly solicited by top universities across the country, explored the intersection of theory and practice, examining how academic understanding of structural barriers could inform real-world advocacy for change. Harvard Law School, impressed by both her intellectual rigor and her practical application of legal principles, offered her early admission with a full scholarship. Perhaps the most meaningful personal transformation, however, occurred in Maya's relationship with her grandmother. Evelyn Jackson had pressed those carefully saved dollars into her granddaughter's palm with instructions to show them how it's done. She had invested not just money, but faith in Maya's dignity and potential. That investment had yielded returns beyond anything either of them could have imagined. Maya had not only stood her ground with the grace and intelligence, she had transformed an attempt at humiliation into a catalyst for meaningful change. She had demonstrated that knowledge, composure, and principled courage could challenge and ultimately transform systems built on unwritten rules about who belonged where. You know, Grandmother Evelyn told her one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies illuminate the dusk, "When I saved those dollars for your ticket, I just wanted you to have the experience of first-class travel. I never imagined you'd end up teaching the whole airline industry about first-class treatment." Maya leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, feeling the quiet strength that had sustained generations of her family through challenges far greater than anything she had faced on Flight 1108. "I couldn't have done it without knowing you were behind me," she said softly. "Knowing where I come from gave me the courage to stand up for where I belong." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "And where you belong, child, is anywhere your heart and mind take you. Don't you ever forget it." Long-term impact. 1 year after the incident on Flight 1108, Maya Jackson stood at a podium in the East Ridge High School auditorium addressing the assembled senior class and their families at graduation. As valedictorian, she had earned the right to deliver the farewell address, but her journey to this moment had been anything but traditional. "When I boarded that flight to New York last May," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I was just a girl with a debate topic about barriers in contracts. I had no idea I was about to experience a real-world case study that would change the trajectory of my life." The audience listened intently. Many knew her story. It had been featured in national news, discussed on talk shows, and even referenced in a congressional hearing on transportation equity. What had begun as a personal indignity had become a touchpoint in a larger conversation about dignity, respect, and the everyday enforcement of rights. "What I learned from that experience wasn't just about airline policies or consumer rights," Maya continued. "It was about the power of standing up for yourself with dignity, about the importance of allies who are willing to speak up when they witness injustice, and about how systems can change when enough people demand accountability." In the years since the incident, Maya's life had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. After winning the National Youth Forensics Championship with a perfect score, an unprecedented achievement, she had received scholarship offers from 17 universities, including every Ivy League school. Her choice of Harvard Law School, with its full scholarship offer, had been influenced by her growing interest in civil rights law and consumer equity. But her impact extended far beyond her personal academic achievements. The Jackson Protocol had spread from Sky East to become an industry standard, with 6 major airlines and dozens of smaller carriers adopting its guidelines for equitable policy enforcement. Independent auditors conducted regular equity testing across airlines, documenting significant improvements in consistent treatment regardless of passenger demographics. The implementation of the Jackson Protocol across the airline industry wasn't without resistance. Maya noted in her speech, initially only Sky East adopted the new guidelines for transparent seat assignment practices. Other carriers dismissed it as an overreaction to a singular incident. She explained how that changed when consumer advocacy groups began conducting audit testing, sending passengers of different backgrounds with identical reservations to document treatment disparities. The resulting data showed troubling patterns that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents. Within 6 months, 2 more major airlines had adopted similar protocols. Within a year, it had become an industry standard championed by the Department of Transportation as a model practice. The impact extended beyond airlines to other consumer contexts as well. Retail chains, hotels, healthcare facilities, and financial institutions had begun examining their own practices regarding policy enforcement, inspired by the transparency and accountability demonstrated in the aviation industry's response. Academic interest in Maya's experience and its aftermath continued to grow. Harvard Law School had developed a case study based on Flight 1108 for its courses on consumer rights and discrimination. Business schools incorporated the incident into their ethics curriculum, examining how unwritten expectations about who belonged in premium spaces could undermine officially neutral policies. Perhaps most meaningfully, Maya had established the Fly High Foundation with some of the settlement funds she had received, providing travel scholarships to low-income students competing in academic competitions across the country. The foundation ensured that financial constraints wouldn't prevent talented young people from participating in opportunities for growth and recognition. As we leave Westwood High today, she concluded in her valedictorian address, we carry with us the knowledge that our voices matter, that justice is possible, and that sometimes standing up for what's right creates change far beyond what we might imagine. The world isn't always fair, but that doesn't mean we should accept unfairness as inevitable. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, "This isn't right," and having the courage to stand firm in that truth. As Maya returned to her seat amid thunderous applause, she caught her grandmother's eye in the audience. Evelyn Jackson was beaming with pride, tears streaming down her face. It was her words that had started Maya on this journey. You go fly, baby, and you fly up front. Show them how it's done. Maya had done exactly that, in more ways than one. And in the fall, she would be attending Harvard Law School on a full scholarship with an acceptance letter that specifically mentioned her extraordinary demonstration of advocacy skills and commitment to justice. Qualities she had exhibited not just in debate competitions, but in that pivotal moment when she refused to accept being treated as less than she deserved. What had begun as a seat assignment dispute had become something much more significant, a reminder that dignity wasn't a luxury or a privilege, but a right that belonged to everyone regardless of who they were or where they came from. And sometimes defending that dignity could change not just one moment or one flight, but create ripples of transformation that continued long after the journey's end. 1 year later ceremony. The Grand Ballroom of the Atlanta Civic Center had been transformed for the evening's event, the first annual Fly High Foundation Scholarship Gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly appointed tables, each centered with arrangements of blue and silver flowers, the foundation's colors. At the front of the room, beneath a banner reading, Equal Access, Equal Opportunity, stood Maya Jackson. Now 18 and preparing to begin her freshman year at Harvard, she had grown into her role as a civil rights advocate with remarkable poise. Her navy blue evening gown echoed the blazer she had worn on that fateful flight, a subtle reminder of where this journey had begun. Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural scholarship celebration of the Fly High Foundation. Maya began, her voice carrying confidently through the ballroom. 1 year ago today, I boarded a flight that changed not just my life, but initiated conversations about access, belonging, and accountability across our nation. The audience included an impressive cross-section of supporters, corporate executives who had implemented equity protocols in their companies, civil rights attorneys who had helped develop the foundation's legal framework, educators who had incorporated the Flight 1108 case study into their curriculum, and most importantly, the 20 high school students who had received the foundation's first travel scholarships. Tonight isn't about looking backward at what happened on that flight, Maya continued. It's about looking forward to what comes next, to the opportunities we're creating for students who might otherwise be limited by financial constraints. She gestured toward the scholarship recipients seated at tables of honor near the front. These remarkable young people represent the future of academic excellence and civic leadership. They're debaters, scientists, musicians, mathematicians, all with the potential to transform their fields and our society. And now, thanks to your generosity, they have the resources to travel to competitions, conferences, and programs that will help them realize that potential. Among the distinguished guests were several familiar faces from Flight 1108, Dr. Daniela Rodriguez, who had documented the incident and continued to advise Maya on legal matters. James Westbrook, the retired pilot who had been the first passenger to speak up in Maya's defense, and Brandon Miller, the flight attendant whose support group for airline staff had expanded into a national network of transportation equity advocates. Even some unexpected faces were present. Patricia Whitfield, the former gate agent, had been invited at Maya's insistence. After her public acknowledgement of bias and subsequent work in corporate training, Patricia had become an unlikely but effective voice for accountability and transformation. Our foundation's mission extends beyond financial support, Maya explained to the assembled guests. We're building a community of mentorship and advocacy, ensuring that these students not only reach their destinations, but find welcome and belonging when they arrive. As Maya outlined the foundation's achievements in its first year, 20 scholarships awarded, partnerships established with 5 major airlines for discounted educational travel, and the development of a Know Your Rights curriculum for young travelers. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone very special, Maya said, her voice softening. My grandmother, Evelyn Jackson, whose wisdom, sacrifice, and faith made all of this possible. Evelyn stood elegant in a silver dress, acknowledging the standing ovation with dignified grace. When my grandmother pressed those carefully saved dollars into my hand and told me to fly up front and show them how it's done, she wasn't just talking about airplane seating, Maya continued. She was teaching me about claiming space, about carrying myself with dignity regardless of who questioned my presence, about knowing my rights and having the courage to stand firm in them. The room grew quiet as Maya's voice took on a more reflective tone. What began as a simple desire to arrive well-rested for a debate competition became something much larger, a case study in how seemingly neutral contracts can create barriers through selective enforcement, and how those barriers can be challenged through knowledge, composure, and collective witness. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the scholarship recipients. My hope for each of you is that you travel not just with tickets and boarding passes, but with the unshakable knowledge that you belong in every space your ambitions and abilities take you. And if anyone suggests otherwise, you'll have not only your own voice to affirm your belonging, but the voice of this entire community standing with you. As the evening progressed, Maya presented each scholarship recipient, sharing their academic achievements and future aspirations. The students represented diverse backgrounds, interests, and geographic regions, but they shared a common quality, the potential for excellence that deserved to be recognized and nurtured. The final presentation of the evening was the announcement of the Jackson Protocol Compliance Award, recognition for the transportation company that had demonstrated the most significant improvement in equitable policy enforcement over the past year. The winner, announced by Dr. Rodriguez, was SkyEast Airlines, the very company whose flight had sparked the movement. This award represents more than corporate accountability, Dr. Rodriguez explained. It represents the possibility of transformation, the capacity for organizations to acknowledge failures, implement meaningful changes, and ultimately create more equitable systems. As the gala concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by scholarship recipients eager to express their gratitude and share their aspirations. A young scientist headed to an international physics competition in Geneva, a violinist traveling to Juilliard for a summer intensive program, a chess prodigy attending the national championship in Seattle. Each of these journeys had been made possible by the foundation that had emerged from Maya's own journey, a foundation built on the principle that talent and ambition deserve support regardless of financial circumstances, and that everyone had the right to be treated with dignity in the spaces they legitimately accessed. As Maya watched these young people, their faces alight with possibilities, she reflected on how a confrontation that could have left her feeling diminished had instead expanded her sense of purpose and potential. She had transformed an attempt at exclusion into a platform for inclusion, a moment of injustice into a movement for equity. And in doing so, she had honored her grandmother's instruction in the deepest possible way. She had not just shown them how it was done, she was showing a new generation how it could be done with knowledge, dignity, and the courage to stand firm in the truth of one's own belonging. Legacy and future. The impact of Flight 1108 and Maya's response to it continued to ripple outward in expanding circles of influence. What had begun as a seat assignment dispute had evolved into a case study, a protocol, a foundation, and ultimately, a framework for understanding and addressing selective enforcement of supposedly neutral agreements. Consumer advocates across industries had adopted the Jackson framework as a tool for identifying and challenging discriminatory patterns in contract enforcement. The framework posed three essential questions. Are the written terms of the agreement being applied consistently to all consumers, regardless of perceived status or belonging? Do unwritten courtesies or conventions create a two-tier system of rights enforcement when consumers assert their contractual rights? Are they met with equivalent responses regardless of demographics? These questions were being applied to rental agreements, financial services, healthcare policies, educational opportunities, and countless other contexts where seemingly neutral contracts governed access to goods, services, and spaces. The Harringtons, whose attempt to displace Maya from her assigned seat had catalyzed the incident, experienced lasting consequences for their behavior. Thomas never fully recovered his professional standing at Harrington and Powell Law. After serving his 6-month suspension from the state bar, he returned to find his client list significantly reduced and his influence in the firm diminished. He eventually took early retirement, citing a desire to focus on personal priorities. Victoria's social exile from Atlanta's elite circles persisted, though she eventually found a different kind of community through her church's reconciliation ministry. After initial resistance, she began speaking candidly about her experience as someone whose privilege had blinded her to the harm her behavior caused others. While her transformation appeared genuine, the Harringtons had learned the hard way that accountability could not be avoided through status or influence. Patricia Whitfield, the former gate agent, continued her work with corporate training programs, using her own failure as a teaching tool for others. "I'm the cautionary tale," she often said in her presentations. "I'm what happens when unconscious bias becomes conscious discrimination." For Maya, the legacy of Flight 1108 extended into her academic future at Harvard Law School. Her admission letter had specifically mentioned her extraordinary demonstration of advocacy skills and commitment to justice, qualities she had exhibited not just in debate competitions, but in that pivotal moment when she refused to accept being treated as less than she deserved. As she prepared for her first semester, Maya received an unexpected invitation from the law school's dean of admissions. "We would like you to address our incoming class during orientation." The email read, "Your experience provides a powerful example of how legal principles apply in everyday contexts and how individual dignity can catalyze institutional change." The invitation reflected a growing recognition in legal education that lived experience of structural barriers provided valuable insight that complemented theoretical understanding. Maya's ability to articulate both the academic principles and their real-world manifestation made her perspective particularly valuable. Meanwhile, the Jackson Protocol, as it had come to be known in the transportation industry, continued to transform how airlines trained staff, implemented policies, and responded to customer concerns. Independent auditors conducted regular equity testing across carriers, documenting significant improvements in consistent treatment regardless of passenger demographics. The Department of Transportation had incorporated elements of the protocol into its regulatory guidance, establishing clear standards for equitable policy enforcement that applied to all airlines. International carriers were beginning to adopt similar guidelines, recognizing that consumers worldwide were increasingly attentive to issues of discriminatory treatment. Corporate America had taken note as well. Companies across sectors were examining their own practices regarding policy enforcement, inspired by the transparency and accountability demonstrated in the aviation industry's response. Retail chains, hotels, financial institutions, and healthcare providers were implementing training programs focused on consistent application of policies regardless of customer demographics. On her last night in Atlanta before departing for Harvard, Maya sat with her grandmother on the familiar porch swing, watching fireflies illuminate the dusk. They had spent the evening going through Maya's carefully packed belongings, making sure she had everything she needed for her new life in Cambridge. "I keep thinking about that day you gave me the money for my ticket," Maya said softly. "How neither of us could have imagined what would come of it." Evelyn smiled, her wise eyes reflecting the gathering twilight. "Maybe not the specifics, child, but I always knew you were meant for something important. That's why I wanted you to fly first class, not just for the comfort, but for the statement it made, that you belonged in those spaces just as much as anyone." Maya leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, feeling the quiet strength that had sustained generations of her family through challenges far greater than anything she had faced on Flight 1108. What you're doing with your foundation, with your advocacy, that's the real legacy. Evelyn continued, you're not just opening doors for yourself, you are making sure they stay open for others coming behind you. As they rocked gently in the evening breeze, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this threshold between past and future. She had boarded that flight to New York as a debate champion with theoretical understanding of structural barriers. She would begin her studies at Harvard as someone who had not just studied those barriers, but confronted and transformed them, who had demonstrated through lived experience how knowledge, dignity, and collective witness could challenge systems built on unwritten rules about who belonged where. The navy blue blazer that had been her armor on that fateful flight hung in her closet, now replaced by the confidence that came from knowing her worth was not determined by others' perceptions. She carried that knowledge with her like an internal compass, guiding her towards spaces where she could continue to make meaningful change, not just for herself, but for all those whose belonging was questioned simply because of who they were or where they came from. If you were inspired by this true story of courage and standing up for what's right, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful content that shines a light on everyday heroes. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters and that one person can truly make a difference. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Remember, sometimes the most powerful form of change starts with simply refusing to accept injustice.